All right. Good afternoon, almost, yes. Welcome to the PSTE Subcommittee. We're here to hear 4 budgets today, and we'll go in the following order: Office of the Public Defender, Workers' Compensation Commission, Department of Environment, and Department of Juvenile Services. We are joined by Jacob Polikoff to start with the OPD. Jacob.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, Jacob Polikoff for the Department of Legislative Services to present the budget analysis for the Office of the Public Defender. We'll see on page 1 under the operating budget summary that the fiscal 2025 budget for the Office of the Public Defender increases by $10.4 million, or about 7.2%, to a total of $155.3 million. Moving to page 2 at the top, we have some information on 2 proposed deficiency appropriations for fiscal 2024, which add a total of $3.5 million in general funds. The first is $2.5 million to provide one-time funding for expenses incurred in fiscal 2023. And the second appropriation is for $1 million to provide one-time funding for the costs associated with the District 1 headquarters move. In the middle of page 2, we have an overview of the agency's fiscal 2025 spending. As illustrated in Exhibit 1, in the middle of page 2, we'll see that approximately 82% of the OPD's allowance is allocated to district operations, with smaller shares of funding for the other 3 programs, which are General Administration, Appellate and Inmate Services, and Involuntary Institutionalization Services. Moving to page 3, we'll see that there's information on the proposed budget change. As I mentioned, that's 7.2% of an increase over the fiscal 2024 working appropriation. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows that this growth is mainly driven by salary increases, along with the creation of 43 new positions, which include 27 new assistant public defenders. We'll have further discussion of those new positions in just a moment. But I'll also highlight that there are increased rent expenses, funding for the eDefender case management software, which was previously funded in the Department of Information Technology budget, as well as the removal of some one-time costs from fiscal 2024's appropriation. Towards the bottom of page 4, the lower half of page 4, we'll see personnel data for the Office of the Public Defender showing that as of December 31st, there were 108.5 positions vacant, which was a vacancy rate of 11.56%. OPD has had struggles with consistently high vacancy rates for several years. Of the current vacancies, 37 are positions which were newly created in the fiscal 2024 appropriation. The new positions present in the fiscal 2025 allowance are in classifications that currently have high vacancy rates, which, turning to page 5, we'll see key observation number 1 discusses ongoing vacancy issues at OPD. For several years, as I've noted, OPD has had vacancy rates of several percentage points above the budgeted turnover rate for the agency. Currently, there's a total of 109 vacant positions, including 37, which I said were created created in the fiscal 2024 appropriation. The existing vacancies include 71 assistant public defender positions and are shown as a whole in Exhibit 3 in the middle of page 5. So again, we see those 71 assistant public defender vacancies, along with vacancies for assistant public defender supervisors, intake specialists, social workers, and other employees, including support staff. As I noted, the fiscal 25 allowance for OPD includes an additional 43 regular positions, many of which are in the same categories as existing vacancies, including 27 new assistant public defender positions, which, when combined with existing vacancies, total 98 vacancies for assistant public defenders. OPD's allowance includes these new assistant public defender positions in an effort to bring attorney caseloads in line with new national standards that were released in calendar 2023. OPD's most recent Managing for Results data utilized these standards and indicated that the agency needs approximately 925 additional attorneys, including the positions in the fiscal 2025 allowance, in order to bring the caseload per attorney in line with the national standard. The agency is currently working to refine the national standards to fit specific characteristics for Maryland, and the total number of additional attorneys needed to meet those standards is not yet available. Expanded data on existing vacancies compared to new positions by the category of work is found in Exhibit 4, which is towards the top of page 6. So we'll see that assistant public defenders, social workers, and other employees both have existing vacancies as well as new positions in the fiscal 25 allowance. The vacancy issues contribute to the caseloads, which we'll discuss in a moment, which are an issue. When attorneys leave the Office of the Public Defender, they do so for a variety of reasons, including higher rates of pay or lower caseloads, which are available in other state agencies, federal agencies, or the private sector. When higher level positions become vacant, OPD often promotes attorneys from within the agency to fill higher level positions. This method of filling one vacancy by creating another does allow for a greater number of entry-level positions to be filled each year. However, OPD has stated that despite the agency's best efforts to recruit graduating law students, they often face competition from other employers, which results in an inability to fill all assistant public defender vacancies. The agency has stated they are committed to filling every vacancy for attorneys, social workers, support staff, and other employees. However, given the agency's struggle to fill positions which were created in the fiscal 2024 appropriation, it's prudent to adjust the level of funding for new positions through an adjustment to the turnover rate. The allowance includes a turnover rate of 5.88% for existing positions and 5.9% for new positions. Increasing these rates to 7.5% for existing positions and the standard 25% for new positions would reduce the budget amount for OPD by about $2.5 million, with $1.7 million of the reduction being for existing positions and just over $816,000 being for new positions. This action brings the budget turnover rate closer to OPD's current vacancy rate and provides for an expected gap of 3 months as a standard after the start of the year for OPD to fill newly created positions. Therefore, the Department of Legislative Services recommends that the budgeted turnover adjustment for OPD be reduced by $1.7 million for existing regular positions in order to align the budget amount more closely with the current vacancy rate, and by $816,719 for new regular position salaries in order to account for the time needed to fill newly created positions after the start of the fiscal year. On page 7, we'll see that case numbers remain below pre-pandemic levels, as shown in Exhibit 5 towards the middle of page 7. OPD has experienced a decrease in the total number of cases that it handles annually since the pandemic. Between calendar 2014 and 2019, OPD represented defendants in more than 200,000 cases per year, with the exception of 2017, where the total was just over 196,000. OPD converted its reporting data to fiscal years beginning with fiscal 21, so we'll see in the exhibit that January through June of 2020 are captured within fiscal 21 for reporting purposes. Since fiscal 2021, the busiest year for OPD was fiscal 2022, where representation was provided in 127,660 cases. The decrease in the number of cases per year has allowed OPD to decrease its usage of panel attorneys, which reduces the total amount of fees that the state pays to private attorneys to cover cases which OPD is unable to handle. In calendar 2019, OPD needed to panel 45,775 district court cases to private attorneys. In fiscal 2023, only 7,639 cases were paneled to private attorneys. Should the number of cases that OPD takes on in a year increase to levels seen in calendar 2019 and prior, OPD should consider how to effectively balance the number of attorneys in regular and contractual positions with its use of panel attorneys in order to be as fiscally responsible as possible. In key observation number 3, which begins on page 8, we'll discuss the new caseload standards, which I've previously mentioned. Beginning with fiscal 2024, OPD is utilizing nationally recognized caseload standards from a group consisting of multiple organizations, including the National Center for State Courts and the American Bar Association, to calculate standard workloads for their attorneys. OPD is in the process of altering these standards to better reflect circumstances specific to Maryland, which will better reflect appropriate caseloads for public defenders in the state, especially compared to previous standards which were created in calendar 2005. The new standards were utilized for the fiscal 2023 MFR data indicate that OPD is understaffed for its current workload by approximately 925 attorneys, with the majority of this gap being found in circuit court felony matters, where OPD estimates that approximately 677 attorneys are needed. Exhibit 6 on page 9 shows the number of attorneys OPD currently has working on each type of case matter, along with the number of attorneys needed to have each attorney maintaining a standard caseload. The gap shown between the number of attorneys that OPD has versus what is needed according to caseload standards represents a significant issue. Current workloads are unsustainable, which can lead to low employee morale, high turnover, and other consequences. The agency's high turnover can exacerbate the existing problem of large caseloads, which then in turn lead back to increased turnover. OPD's recruitment and retention methods should be a subject of focus for its administration. While utilizing the full number of allocated positions will not completely solve the problem of high caseloads, being fully staffed with the currently available positions would decrease caseloads for all attorneys. The Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on attorney hiring and retention in fiscal 2019 through 2024 and average attorney caseloads in fiscal 2024. On page 10, we have the operating budget recommended actions. The first two regard the increase in the budgeted turnover rates. One is a reduction of funds for the existing position salaries. One is a reduction for the new position salaries. And the third recommendation is to adopt the following, adopt the narrative, which I've just mentioned regarding a hiring, separation, and caseloads report. That concludes everything I have for you, but I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions? Okay. Madam Public Defender, welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Natasha Dartigue, State Public Defender. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss FY25 budget for the Office of the Public Defender and to respond to the Department of Legislative Services FY25 budget analysis. We wish to recognize our DLS budget analyst, Jacob Polakov, for his thorough and insightful analysis. And I would note also his pleasant disposition throughout this entire process. Seated at the table with me today, to my right is Keith Lottridge, Deputy Public Defender. Also present today is my Chief Financial Officer, Thaddeus Hubbard, who has been in his role for a short 30 days. I would like to take this opportunity to publicly thank our prior CFO, Kathy Mattis, for her tremendous service to the Office of the Public Defender. She is now retired. In this current budget, additional resources have been allocated to the Office of the Public Defender for FY25, but for an agency that is woefully under-resourced for decades, I respectfully say that is not enough. And I would also note that my advocacy, I would ask that you not take note as it to be a moment of ingratitude, but a sounding of the alarm for the people who work at the Office of the Public Defender. As the deputy and I made rounds and sat down wherever possible and whenever possible with individual members of the House and the Senate, the reality of the fact that we are all public servants really hit home, that we each work for divisions, departments that are important to Maryland. But I had to ask myself, how does the Office of the Public Defender distinguish themselves from the rest of a sea of dedicated public servants throughout the state? Now, I could tell you 940 reasons how we are special, how we are different, and that would represent one for each of the people that work at OPD, but I will not. But I will tell you that it is important for us to ground our conversations in the understanding that public defenders are essentially first responders in the legal space. We play a critical role in the criminal legal system. Like first responders, we are called to a scene of an emergency. We are called to represent clients in court immediately after arrest. We respond to individuals in their deepest, darkest moments of fear and uncertainty. We provide round-the-clock availability, 24/7. We handle cases and provide counsel. We are ready to respond to emergencies and address the legal needs of our clients. Like first responders, we engage in crisis management and provide immediate assistance. We are experienced in dealing with high-stress situations. We are advocates for those in need, and we are deeply rooted in the community, and we work to protect and save lives. But most importantly, like first responders, we cannot say no. And we do not say no to anyone who qualifies for our services. So in that context, we are different than the other agencies that come before you. And it is through this lens that I implore you to assess the needs of the Office of the Public Defender. Now, in the governor's budget, OPD has been allocated an additional 43 positions, of which 27 are attorney positions. OPD is appreciative of this, but the reality is that the number only represents a very small fraction of what is needed to bring us closer to meeting our staffing needs. My request of you today is that you approve FY25 budget with additional funding. I respectfully request that you exercise your authority to supplement the FY25 budget by providing additional funding to address OPD's tremendous retention and workload needs. Now, elsewhere in the criminal legal system, you provide additional resources. We're asking that you provide OPD with parity with those investments that are made elsewhere. So, for example, proposed increases in the judiciary, state prosecutorial, and law enforcement agencies. And I do make note, for example, that the state's attorney's office throughout the state do receive additional funding from the state, even though their respective budgets are essentially from the jurisdictions that they serve. OPD does not receive any additional funding from any of the jurisdictions, even though we represent individuals in all 23 jurisdictions, in all 23 counties and Baltimore City throughout Maryland, and we have 52 offices throughout the state. OPD is currently in crisis. An additional increase that is requested is in fact urgent. And I speak of the urgency in terms of recruitment, retention, and workloads. Recruitment. We have been incorporating a multifaceted approach to filling our existing vacancies. As of this past Monday, February the 12th, OPD has 77 attorney vacancies. And this does not include pending hires from 3 hiring fairs, which we held in the last 5 months. The most recent hiring fair was just last week. It yielded an additional attorney hires. As of today, individuals that have a start date between February the 21st and June the 30th of this year, that is an additional 17 attorneys that we will be bringing on to bring our vacancy down to 60. Now, that does not speak to the ongoing hiring practices that we do continue to engage in. That number just speaks to the hiring fair that we just recently had. In FY23, we lost 11.5% of our attorney workforce, which is an improvement from FY22. Our hiring practices, I say to you, are not dispositive or reflective of our vacancy rate. Our recruitment and retention challenges directly correlate to our salaries and our workload. Excessive workloads continue to lead to attorney turnover. As I mentioned, we lost 11.5% of our attorney workforce. And again, people leave OPD and go to the same type of public interest work, but in other places where they make more money and the workload is much lighter. Our salaries for all our employees must increase. We must offer a competitive wage. I especially highlight that when I speak about my core staff members. We must increase their compensation to better reflect the experience, the impact, and the immense value that they bring to the defense team. Now, on July 1st, 2023, OPD received additional positions. It's important to note that with the addition of new attorney position, the attorney vacancy rate rose to 18.3%. Our current vacancy rate is 13.75%. This essentially represents the rate of positions that were vacant over a given time and what rolls over from year to year. I would highlight again, we've gone from 18.3% to 13.7%. This reflects a significant 25% decrease from July of 2023. Now, in response to the DLS recommendation that our budgeted turnover adjustment be reduced by $1.7 million for existing regular positions, such a request is untenable and OPD vehemently objects. The reality is that we are unable to sustain operations if we were to be subject to such a reduction. An increase in our budget turnover adjustment for existing and new positions will effectively put an increased pressure on the already tenuous budget that we have and will significantly slow the momentum of our documented hiring surge. OPD has already reduced our attorney vacancy rate by, like I said, there has been a 25% decrease since just July of 2023. And we continue to aggressively recruit and hire attorneys and core staff to fill all available vacancies as quickly as possible. Our OPD hiring fairs have proven to be extremely successful. OPD would be able to continue to do this for attorneys, and this would be the same practice that we would like to continue with our core staff positions. If the vacancy is increased to 25%, that would not allow us to continue to fill vacancies until after the first quarter, which significantly stymies our ability to provide relief to our staff members who are already overburdened and would result in a greater rate of attrition. Now, retention and workload do go hand in hand. Our attorneys carry an excessively high volume of cases, which are more time intensive, require a greater level of legal expertise, more administrative support, and additional expert services. Excessive workloads reverberate through issues of recruitment, retention, compensation, and morale. We have few areas where we are adequately staffed. The National Public Defense Workload Study that was published in September of 2023, that was conducted by the American Bar Association and the RAND Corporation, outlines what the standard is and establishes the benchmark for constitutional compliance by measuring the effort that is needed in a particular case to meet the Sixth Amendment and ethical rules of effective assistance of counsel. The national study focused on attorney workload for adult criminal cases. Essentially, in Maryland, that would be our circuit and district court cases. OPD used those standards and adopted it to the Maryland criminal practice to include, for example, appellate, post-conviction, and juvenile. Based upon the fiscal year 23 data and to comply with national standards, we would need an additional 925 attorneys and also 239 non-attorney positions. However, that is not my ask today. We are developing a multi-year approach to address this tremendous staffing gap. We will be conducting a Maryland Public Defense workload study and are currently in the process of obtaining RFPs. Additional funding will be necessary to effectuate this Maryland-specific workload study and obtain a critical analysis of OPD's overall staffing needs. It is anticipated that a vendor will be selected by the end of summer of this fiscal year 25. As we continue to face retention challenges, they are due to salary inequities with similarly situated agencies and minimal employee incentives. OPD retention challenges, I do emphasize, are rooted in that OPD does not have parity with the Office of the Attorney General. OPD continues to face inequities with core staff salaries. OPD is unable to guarantee yearly payment of licensing and certification fees for applicable employees. And OPD continues to lack a sustained paid intern and law clerk program. We do give special thanks in that fiscal year 24. We were allocated some additional funding so that we were able to bring in approximately 50 students across the state for a 6-month assignment to support our offices. And in keeping with the governor's initiative, we do seek to expand the internship program year-round to cover all OPD offices. Our workload standards reveal that the status quo is abhorrent and cannot and must not continue. We are in desperate need of additional resources. The funding will not only go to support our staff, but will also support our staff in terms of technology. We have seen an exponential growth in terms of e-discovery videos, for example, which requires greater network and software updates, as well as increased storage. And we definitely need an upgrade in terms of our technology to meet our day-to-day challenges and the volume of work. We also must keep in pace with the changing legal environment across the state, and we must mirror the resources and efforts that are allocated to other agencies in the criminal legal space. We also must compensate our attorneys and core staff for the work performed in order to recruit, retain, and provide superior legal representation as required of us, but most importantly, that our clients deserve. Now, you will hear from others in regards to the work of the Office of the Public Defender. As the leader of the office, I lead an incredible team of talented, dedicated, and resilient public servant. I urge you to return a favorable report that consists not only of the approval of the FY25 budget, but also includes an allocation of additional resources to address the needs that have been explained. I implore you to increase an investment in OPD. For doing so is essentially the means of ensuring that justice, fairness, and dignity for all Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you. I would see some lights. Okay, I think Senator Salling and then Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all the information and very well detailed. Appreciate that. Just a couple questions, real quick. We know that the caseload is very heavy and we don't have enough help. We hear that throughout the administration. We know the importance of it, and we've seen the different departments and how they did the outreach. Some of the even the caseloads, for instance, in corrections and other areas where they need a lot of help. So they did some good work also. But want to just talk about the caseloads per day or maybe weekly. What's the average for the caseloads for maybe per PD?
So essentially, the number of cases vary by jurisdiction and also by unit. But I do want to center the conversation because we speak about in terms of workloads versus caseloads.
Right.
So essentially, caseloads are the number of cases that one carries, and that fluctuates from time to time. But even with that fluctuation of the number of cases, the workload continues to increase because the practice of law has changed. So for example, with the addition of body cam and how we are so much more reliant as a society in terms of videos. So an incident can occur and everyone on the street has their phones out. And so you can imagine how that multiplies in terms of a case, for example, the amount of evidence that an attorney and the team has to review. When you have the number of cases, again, will vary from jurisdiction.
From different loads, I mean, and different types, I'm sure.
Yes, and different types. So if you are in the district court, you may carry, for example, 30 cases a day in your practice. But in the circuit court, a felony caseload may be from 50 to 70 cases, depending upon where you are in the state. Also determines how many live cases you have. Live cases are, for example, rapes and murders. So if you're one of the, what I call the highly densely populated jurisdictions, for example, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel, Prince George's, Montgomery, you'll have a higher degree of, for example, live cases than if you were in a more remote region
Like
where,
Frederick, yes.
right, Frederick or Allegheny, where they don't see that many type of those cases.
Thank you. Just if I could, I hear you by number what you need. What would you say would help you if you were full staff? You right now you're saying you're understaffed, you need the help. What would you say by number if you're asked for today? Because I know that number, what you just stated, but how it could help you to cut back that workload.
Are you asking me number of dollars or number of individuals?
Personnel.
A number of personnel at minimum, I would say 80.
You would 80 for right
Yeah.
now, and we'll cut back. Okay, because I know that's very important. And you were talking about a study.
Yes.
And I know it's important. We push a lot of studies in the Senate and the House. And at times we believe they're very important to get some good answers. So I believe if there's any help in that study, I'm sure this committee would love to help with that. And if we can, please let us know. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very
Madam Chair.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to see you.
Same.
You both. A couple of questions for you. One, who sanctioned the study that you're doing? You said the ABA and RAND. So who's paying for that?
So the American Bar Association and the RAND Corporation, that was an independent study that was
Okay.
not done by us, or was not the state of Maryland. However, that study only looked to the adult practice.
Mhm.
And we, in terms of making the standards applicable to Maryland, also had to adapt it to include our non-attorney positions, as well as in Maryland, our practice includes juvenile, appellate, post-conviction, parental defense, all the other areas in which we support the community. So we also had to make that adjustment. For the study that we are seeking, that is
Before you
Maryland.
go to your study, so the adjustment that you made,
Yes,
so the additional resources needed to do that, or did you ask them to include those?
we use their basically rubric,
Mhm.
and essentially we applied it to the Maryland standard. So essentially the blood, sweat and tears we did within the Office of the Public Defender. However, an actual study needs to be done to assess what the needs are for our office across all areas. That would be an independent organization that would be required to do that study, and we are now in the procurement process.
Okay, so thank you. That independent study that you're seeking, who is going to pay for that?
We would have to seek resources from the state to pay for that.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, if I might. So during our conversation, one of the, we all need help. And GoCap has been available, and others have been available to sort of level set your environment, right? So you mentioned to the committee, and your funding comes from us solely. The local state attorney's offices come up for additional, and there are other agencies that help them seek out specific grant dollars and other resources. So I would like to mention to you again that if you're seeking additional resources, whether it's helping with your IT because of the body-worn cameras, every public safety agency, in the state has sought additional resources. So we would like to stay close to you to help you, assist you in finding resources as you move forward, because your entire budget is based upon what we do here. Again, there are supplemental efforts. So for example, when a state's attorney's office says we have in this particular area of region of the state, we have a high propensity of crimes, we've seen an upshoot. Well, the Office of the Public Defender should be asking for those same dollars and seeking those resources from the folks that they've been getting those resources from. So we would love to work with you going forward on that. So we can continue that conversation.
Yes.
Whenever you like. So your IT, so your system, you mentioned you need an upgrade, or where are you with that? And I'm not sure if that was part of the analysis or not.
No, there is part of it. There's mention of it in the proposed budget changes, but it's not anything that was really significant.
Gotcha.
To merit further.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, thank you. And lastly, Madam Chair, so you spoke of the job fairs you've had for your attorneys, and that you would like to see that for your core staff as well. So when you have your job fairs, is it just for attorneys, or is it for your core staff as well?
So in regards to our hiring fairs, we participate in various job fairs and have always participated in terms of job fairs with our core staff. What was new to our agency is essentially the developing of the hiring fair. And in the hiring fair, essentially, we advertised, we had individuals do free interview videos, and essentially they came in, and that same day they were able to go through several levels of interviews, and essentially we were able to make conditional offers all in the same day. That is a new practice, essentially, of really streamlining and bringing individuals in quickly that we
Yes.
had not engaged in before.
Yes, ma'am. A lot of the agencies that come before us are employing that practice as well. So partnerships with our for your core staff and others, with the community colleges and the university systems. If you could speak to that, or you could always send us additional information to the committee to help us help you and us totally. In that regard, lastly, Madam Chair, I can't remember last year if we, as we talked to some of the agencies about having their own salary schedule or petitioning for your own salary schedule so you can keep up. And so if I just can't remember where we were with that, or if that was gonna come up. So I think that was the last one for now. So
If
thank you all.
If I just may, just respond. So in terms of GoCap and additional federal agencies that offer resources, we do take advantage of those. In fact, a lot of the programming that we have, especially through our parental defense division, is greatly supported by additional funds outside of our general budget. Sometimes we do come up against the fact that there's special criteria for funding in terms of law enforcement that we don't necessarily qualify, or it's not open to us, but we are availing ourselves. We're turning every rock, every stone, all looking.
And I do
yeah.
appreciate that. And what I would say to that, that's terrific. But sometimes, we need to be prepared for what tomorrow brings. And just because we've been doing things a certain way, and if you're not meeting the qualifications, let's try to figure out how we get you to qualify. Because if there's an uptick in cases, we need folks to look out for. Everybody gets made whole in the system. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And I am keeping track of how many questions everybody gets over time. It's only fair.
I have one more. It's just, I know it's been tough because of the workload, what you need, but it would be good to know maybe the qualifications or certifications that they need for the job. Because I know a lot of times people aren't, qualified, I guess you can say, to do the job. So is there ways that they can be certified or they can do, yes?
In terms of our attorneys, by statute, you have to be a barred licensed Maryland attorney.
Okay.
Yes, you have to be, yes.
But there's other positions and other opportunities in the.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And if there's certifications, are they available for other jobs?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
in terms of the job description,
Yes.
but the MS-22, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So first of all, congratulations on the progress you've made to date, especially with this last hiring fair. Please don't look at the DLS recommendations or the discussion we're about to have as a reflection on how we value your department. We value it greatly. We are also our chief job is to be bean counters today. And so I'm going to ask a couple questions about your attrition rate and then your capacity to fill vacancies. So quick math, back of the envelope. I probably don't have the right number here, but did I hear correctly that there was about an 11.5% attrition rate in terms of the attorneys you lost, or is that overall? Not just attorneys, but overall.
That would be attorneys.
Okay, so that's a little close to 40, would you say? Is that math correct over the last year?
The exact number, my HR director is also here. She's
64 for fiscal year 2023.
Okay, and for the folks watching at home, is it
Yes.
64?
Yes.
Okay, and is that about average, or was it a particularly bad or a good year for that? Would you mind coming?
Yeah.
I just want to, what we're trying to do here is make sure the budget meets what you're able to fill. And I'm just trying to do the math of the vacancies you have yet to fill and plan for the attrition that you anticipate based on past years or trends.
Okay, I'm Dawn Kineski, the Human Resources Director for OPD, and the 64 that we lost in fiscal 23 is actually a decrease from fiscal 22, which was, we saw 79 attorneys leave.
Okay. Okay, so let's say you're 77 down right now, you're hiring 17 to come on before the next fiscal year, but let's be conservative here and say you lose even 50 over the next year or over time. So that leaves you at about 110. Do you have a plan? We want you to be successful. We want you to fill those vacancy rates, but we also have to have a bit of a come to the moment of, are you capable, based on the current structures, which I'm going to have a follow-up question to in a moment, to fill those vacancies, 110 estimated over the next year?
So a couple of things. So the hiring fairs is essentially just one means in which we are able to bring individuals in. We are on a rolling basis bringing attorneys in, licensed attorneys throughout the state. We also have a pool of I say attorneys that are in the queue, and that meaning that there are those who are either currently doing clerkships and essentially their start date is not until the calendar year of 25 because they have to fulfill those responsibilities. And then we also have a set of individuals who are 3Ls, third year law students, who essentially we have made offers to, but then of course it's contingent upon them passing the bar. So we do have a set number of individuals who are, like I said, in the queue, in addition to individuals who are coming in on a rolling basis and the ones that we just cited.
Yeah, so for the start of the new fiscal year between July and September, we already have from the first 2 job fairs, 10 attorneys that have already accepted offers of employment. And then we have 15 3L students who have tentative start dates of January 2025. And we have, 18 people that offers were made from the last job fair. And half of them will be starting in the next couple of months with, additional ones starting in August.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
And I believe when we're parsing these numbers that if we had, do you have for us the total number of hires since July 1st?
Yes, if you include the projected hires through January of 2025, we have hired 103 attorneys since July 1st. We've hired 44 core staff, 25 contractuals, so 172 total.
Okay.
So in answer to your question, that is a big number you're talking about us having, but if you look in the last 6 months, we have made significant strides, which the hiring fair is only a part of. We've also revamped our entire recruitment. So yes, we anticipate we'll be able to more than fill every position you give us reasonably.
That's the core of our concern here is just, can you make up the difference within the fiscal year? And if not, it's our job as appropriators to make sure we're saving the state money. And that's not a reflection on the value of your department, a reflection on our job here. That speaks to what Senator Jackson alluded to with last year. We did allow within some constraints the AG and the comptroller to reclassify internally and not have to go through DBM. But it speaks to, I think you have a structural issue here, and you reference this, Madam Public Defender, about the classification of the vacancies that you have, and are they competitively situated enough to actually attract. So can you speak a little bit to your conversation with DBM? Because that is not something we can do. We can put the money in the budget, but it's ultimately up to DBM to reclassify or increase your salary for your PINs.
So as a result of last year's budget, we were able to do some reclassifications. We were able to create a APD senior position, which allowed us to promote from within and retain some senior level attorneys. So we were able to do that.
Okay.
However, it should be noted that last year, the Attorney General's office did get essentially a 1 grade increase for every single attorney. We got essentially 27. We have over 600 attorneys, and we were only able to get 27 of those up to a commiserate level with the Attorney General. And actually, if we were to break down the number of people we lost this year, the number of people who resigned, and I bring this up because I got notice last night of another one who is going to the Attorney General's office, because quite frankly, they are doing the same job and being paid 1 grade higher than every single one of our attorneys.
Right. And we hear from our state's attorneys complaining about the same thing as well.
The difference being the state's attorneys have local, well, the federal government, if you'd give me the federal government, would be great. But as Madam Public Defender stated, the local state's attorneys have the ability to advocate here and in their own county settings. And quite often they are actually getting relief there. We do not have that option.
Right. So again, we're going to do our absolute best for you, but it needs to be a continued conversation with DBM about grades and about reclassifications, and all of those things together is going to hopefully get you to a 0% vacancy rate, which is what we want to see. Thank you for allowing me to ask those questions. Senator Rosepap.
Thank you. Good to see you. Pardon me for being a little late. Of the new attorneys that you've hired in the last year, can you give us a little profile of who they are, in the sense of how much experience, what kind of practice were they doing before? Are they from California? I mean, just, and I wonder off the top of your head, I'm not asking for statistics, but so we can get a picture of who your new hires are.
So we have the benefit of recruiting from throughout the country.
Right.
We have a large number who were former volunteers. We have individuals who were 3L students. We also have individuals from clerkships. We also have opportunities to have individuals who work from other public defense organizations that come to Maryland to work with us. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. I'd like to get a sense of quantitatively
Mhm.
in terms of buckets.
Yeah, the numbers.
So I don't have the numbers, but
Yeah.
anecdotally, I would
Anecdotally,
say,
that's what I'm asking.
a majority, the truth is, it's much harder to hire experienced attorneys. We're not competitive with federal public defenders or a lot of other organizations, to say the least. But so experienced attorneys are hard for us to find. So we are hiring mostly newer attorneys or
You can
attorneys
see,
just out of law school.
Okay.
A large proportion of those are from local law schools. And as Madam Public Defender said, a lot of them are people we've had connections with before, meaning they volunteered or they've been law clerks, which is one of the reasons we put in Madam Public Defender's statement,
Mhm.
how grateful we were for the paid internship program, because quite frankly, we've hired some of those interns already. And the ones in college have actually, I know of several examples where people were paid interns. They decided to go to law school after that, and they intend to be public defenders. That's 4 years down the road, but we are creating that pipeline. But I think in answer to your question, a lot of them are local, but we do have, we make efforts to get people from across the country, and quite often transplants, people who a spouse is moving.
Got it.
Getting those. And that's where we're getting a lot of our more experienced attorneys coming in.
Got it. That's the picture I was looking for. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 witnesses. We're happy to stay to hear what they have to say.
Yes, thank you.
Of course.
I have 3 people signed up to testify. Ms. Lawrence, Ms. Cheslock, and actually I have 4, Ms. Miles and Mr. Perry. Thank you. And we follow full committee rules. We appreciate you being here, but we do have a 2-minute timeline. Thank you. And if you can just identify yourself before you start, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rashida Lawrence, and I'm a member of AFSCME Local 423. Presently, I'm a social worker in District 11, Frederick and Washington counties for the Office of the Public Defender. I've been with the Public Defender's Office since 2014 in several capacities, as a social work intern, as a panel social worker, as a contractual social worker. But it was only recently in 2022, I was able to become permanent staff. Prior to that, there were no PINs, or there were limited PINs for social workers. Presently, I was hired to work with the juvenile population. At this time, due to staffing shortages, I'm only able to provide assistance to attorneys for children that are charged as adults. Excuse me. We are literally triaging cases due to limited staff. I will add that every social worker referral we receive from attorneys cannot get a social worker because there's simply not enough of us. We are so understaffed that I also provide assistance in Prince George's County. My office is in Hagerstown, Maryland, and I live in Frederick, Maryland. So yes, I do travel for those cases. OPD currently has 27 social work PINs. To meet the suggested ratio, which may change with the new study, is 1 social worker to every 8 attorneys. That means the PINs would need to double for social work. I'm a wife, a mother, a daughter, and a sister. I have obligations in each of my roles, but I find myself working 7 days a week due to my caseload commitment. Commitment not only to clients, but also my commitment to being a state of Maryland social worker. I sit before you requesting a significant increase in OPD's budget so that we better can serve Maryland citizens. Thank you for this opportunity.
My name is Sam Cheslock. I'm a member of the Maryland Defenders Union and a Secretary 3 at the Post Convictions Division at OPD. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I take pride in the work I do for my office. I want to see the success stories of our clients. I'm here today to express the need for fair wages among core staff. I was a contract employee for 2 years and I recently transitioned to a permanent position. Unfortunately, that has not resulted in a living wage. I am one of many core staffers at OPD who struggle to pay their bills. Rarely qualifying for financial assistance since we technically make too much, yet barely scraping by seems to be the norm for us. My wife and I are moving tomorrow, in fact, further away from my office because even with our combined wages, we can no longer afford our small studio apartment in Baltimore City. I budget, pack lunches, I'm not in debt, but I can't afford to meal plan or get takeout with friends. When someone hears that we work for the state, they often assume that we have great benefits, amazing salaries, and job security. The reality is constant turnover of core staff due to burnout and low wages. It's disheartening to devote our days to an institution that doesn't seem to value our work enough to pay us a living wage. A close colleague of mine has worked tirelessly in several OPD offices for 10 years and has not seen a sufficient increase in their wages to afford even the most basic vehicle. Some core staffers need to travel via 3 modes of transportation to get to work. I had to secure secondary employment to make ends meet. Too many of my colleagues are required to get second jobs. The state budget is a moral document. Funds are allocated according to our values. You can demonstrate that you value OPD core staff by paying us a living wage. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you mind just for a second? Thank you both so much for being here and taking the time to share that with us. If you feel comfortable, just so we have a sense of what your classification of job, what your earnings are, would you be comfortable sharing that just so we have some idea?
Currently, I think my salary is $73,155, but that was only after those increases that came over the past, I think 2 years, maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, but I do know that DJS social workers make a lot more, even coming out of social work school.
Okay, thank you.
As of 2023, I made $45,431 on paper. Brought home a little under 30,000.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chanel Miles, and I am a member of the Maryland Defenders Unit, also under ASME Local 423. I have been working with the Maryland Office of the Public Defender for 4 years. I was an intern with the office in law school and was recruited from law school. I've spent the majority of my practice in district court misdemeanor litigation, and district court practice is fast. The enemy to a public defender is time. And depending on the week, I'm in the courthouse. I'm in court 3 times a week with average caseloads between 36 to 50 cases per week. This is not including the cases that have been postponed prior. Each docket requires dozens of hours of review of body-worn camera footage, as well as other evidence review and going over meaningfully the evidence that a client has against them. Many times, the finite resource of time expires before I need to do adequate legal preparation for a case for a client. I am now working in the circuit court misdemeanor litigation team, and the same challenges are true. In fact, even as of last night, I was visiting my incarcerated clients between 8 to 9 p.m. at the jails. The constraints that we have as public defenders are not due to lack of dedication. We are salary employees and we are paid and compensated for 40 hours of work each week, though we often work 50 to 60 plus hours a week, depending on whether you have a very important trial coming up that week, could increase over 60 hours. Conservatively, considering a 45-week year, we are donating over 450 hours of our time to ensure that our clients' rights are secured. The solution to this deficit is increased funding to fill attorney vacancies, as well as alleviating the pressures currently for line attorneys and ensuring that the right to counsel in Maryland does not dissolve to becoming perfunctory. While we need to recruit and retain attorneys, and I thank you for your time. Yes, thank you. Just say I would add that there just needs to be recruitment and retention of attorneys, especially for law students coming out who are faced with the salary of a public defender versus other opportunities. Thank you for your time.
All right, how are you doing today? Good afternoon, Madam Chair and esteemed committee. My testimony is going to be a little bit different because I not only am an employee of OPD now, but I also was a client. My name is Desmond Perry. I stand before you today as a testament of the transformative power of peer intervention and the unwavering dedication of the Office of the Public Defender. In 2002, at the age of 19, I was convicted of the crime of murder and sentenced to life plus 15 years in prison. Despite having a public defender at that time during my trial, I was still found guilty. It wasn't until another outstanding public defender spent 10 years uncovering prosecutorial misconduct in my case that justice prevailed. 10 years in the post-conviction division. In May of 2022, I was granted a new trial and eventually released from incarceration. This experience drove me to become a forensic peer specialist with the Office of the Public Defender. With firsthand knowledge of the challenges faced within the criminal justice system, I have been committed to offer my support and guidance to individuals navigating similar paths. Through our peer support specialist unit, which is very small, it's only 10 of us for the entire state, and we are not PEN employees, we are contractual. As you can imagine, our caseloads are high. We have successfully transitioned 200 individuals in fiscal year 2023 into treatment and rehabilitation programs, empowering them to reclaim their lives. Our testimonies in court serve as a powerful advocacy tool, amplifying the voices of those often marginalized, stigmatized by society because of their addiction. However, the need for support is pressing. We urge funding allocation for more attorneys, social work staff, peers, and core staff. Additional resources will enable us to provide more holistic defense to people in need. As the Public Defender's Office embodies resilience, compassion, and justice, it provides hope and support to individuals seeking redemption like myself and restoration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for being here and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, with that concludes our hearing with the Office of the Public Defender. Next, we have Workers' Compensation Commission and Elizabeth Wable.
We're gonna stop by later. Okay, I'll message Ali.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me know.
No problem.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Weibel, and I'll be presenting the DLS budget analysis for the Workers' Compensation Commission. On the first page of the analysis, you'll see that the fiscal 2025 allowance increases by 5% or $1.1 million to a total of $23.7 million. These are all in special funds that come from an assessment on insurers. On page 2, the pie chart shows that most of the allowance, or $14.9 million, goes to personnel costs. $2.3 million is allotted to finish out the CompHub IT project, which is an project that is wrapping up to modernize the Commission's case management system. The system itself launched in August, but they are still making some updates as needed and doing some training. There's also $2.6 million for contractual services. The largest portion of that is in IT services contracts. On page 3 in Exhibit 2, you'll see the proposed budget change. The largest increases are in personnel costs and IT services contracts, and the largest decrease is in costs for the major IT project. So you have a decrease in the IT development and launch costs, and then an increase in the maintenance cost for that. On page 4, the personnel data, you'll see there are 13 vacant positions. I understand that, like many agencies, it has been hard to fill some of these positions, particularly those in IT services. They're also adding 7 new contractual personnel to operate metal detectors at their permanent hearing sites. Page 5 has the key observations. The first one is they're continuing to improve the timeliness of setting hearings. In fiscal 23, the commission sent 95% of non-permanency hearings within 60 days of filing. Those are the hearings that aren't about permanent injuries on the job, and that exceeds their goal for setting hearings in a timely manner. Page 6 has an update on the assessments on insurers that fund the commission. The total payroll increased in fiscal 23 more than the commission expenses did, so the rate of the assessments decreased. And these assessments support both the commission's work and the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health Program. The DLS recommendation is found on page 7, and that is to concur with the governor's allowance. That concludes my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Greatly appreciate the brevity of it and conciseness of it. It's wonderful. Okay, Madam. Okay, Madam Chair. Yeah, she's gonna actually, if you don't, yep,
yes.
there we go. Thank you. Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
welcome.
Yes, Chair Alfred and distinguished senators. For the record, my name is Maureen Quinn. I'm the Chair of the Workers' Compensation Commission. And with me is Teresa Cornish. Teresa is our Chief Operating Officer, but she will become our CEO upon the retirement of our sitting CEO on June 1st. And just behind me is our CFO, Dave Jones, and our Director of Fiscal Services, Jay Moore. I became chair of the commission in the beginning of last year, as you may recall, and I do return this year with good news, both operationally and fiscally. Thank you to our budget analyst, Elizabeth Wapel. We look forward to working with you in the years ahead, and we concur with the recommended action of the governor and the analyst allowing our budget request. I want to begin by taking a moment to make sure that the committee knows that the workers' compensation insurance market is financially robust and insurance companies are fiercely competing for business customers. A healthy insurance market is the greatest gift I can envision for both injured workers and the business community. This year, NCCI recommended a 10.4% decrease in premiums. And this is large, but it does continue a 14-year national downward trend in rates. So it's against that market backdrop that I make my remarks on our budget. My greatest priority this past year was the purchase of metal detectors and staff to operate them at our 6 permanent courthouse locations. The project was completed on September 30th. And Dave Jones and Commissioner Evans oversaw the project both with haste and fiscal responsibility, and I'm extremely grateful to both of them for their work. And Senator Jackson, you had asked that we keep you apprised of our progress on this project, and I hope that you were satisfied with our communications. Thank you. My second priority was the deployment of our new computer system known as CompHub. This was a major overhaul, 7 years and $25 million in the making. The first 3 months I would describe as the shakedown cruise of a new aircraft carrier, but we are seaworthy now, and our users have begun to talk about all the things they like about the new system. Our tech support calls are down 85%. But this next year will demand much of our executive staff, as we intend to tackle features of the system that are functioning exactly as designed, but aren't exactly what particular stakeholders would like. In late August, we received our auditor's report covering the years 2018 to 2022. There were 3 findings, 2 of them repeat findings. The most substantive finding, which was not a repeat finding, was that we were not sufficiently proactive in tracking down uninsured companies. I made a key personnel change in the insurance compliance division to address this audit finding and also to address the repeat finding of lax record keeping in this unit. But even before we received the audit, we had recovered from the pandemic pause in pursuing uninsured companies and substantially increased our fines in both FY 2023 and FY 2024. We are working on an MOU with the Department of Unemployment Insurance to use its data to track down additional companies that are uninsured. We have been collaborating with the UEF to address an audit that predicts that the UEF will be insolvent by FY 2030. We absolutely cannot have the political crisis that would arise from a worker being injured on the job and having no recourse when the employer has no insurance. I have spoken with the workers' comp policy representatives in both the House and Senate about the creation of a task force to prevent that insolvency. I know that if we try and find solutions now, then we will succeed in avoiding this catastrophe. UEF Executive Director Mike Burns will be before you next week, and he will no doubt brief you more extensively regarding this issue. With respect to rebuilding state government, we have 115 full-time employees. Vacancies since last year have gone from 17 down to 13, but the ratio of IT vacancies is still at 50%. I undertook a demographic analysis of our agency, and my suspicions were confirmed. 40% of our employees are retirement eligible, and 33% of them, are over the age of 60. So even though we hired 28 employees last year, no matter what we do on recruitment, we are up against the tide of our demography. Lastly, last year we talked about a digital court reporting system because I had 2 unfilled court reporter positions that had been vacant for a year and 4 likely retirements looming. After our hearing, a raise that had been requested was granted, and the next day I allowed permanent work from home on any day the court reporters were not in court. They were thrilled with these changes in their benefits and deferred retirement. And then we had 2 retired federal court reporters fill those long vacant positions. So we were fully staffed all last year for court reporters. And I just want to comment something I said last year, but bears repeating. If I don't have a court reporter, I can't open a courtroom. So this is not in any way a trivial matter. I did lose one of the reporters last month to retirement, but we have had applicants for her vacancies. Nonetheless, the RFP for digital court reporting infrastructure is drafted, and when CompHub becomes less of a drain on our executive staff, we will turn our attention to the procurement process. And with that, I'll await your questions.
Thank you. I was going to ask you where you are in the digital court reporting, but it sounds like
Yes.
you already had it, which makes perfect sense to me. I applaud your expanding, or however you would describe it, a telework for court reporters. I mean, the whole notion that people got to be in an office to do a job, I think, was thrown out the window by the COVID crisis, and now people are trying to, take us back to the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've done is, it's obvious, is so many things don't have to be done on site, and the labor market expands if you let people have flexibility in where they work. So I really applaud you for that. I hope more agencies will do that. I know that it's very controversial, but the era of everybody goes to the office is over.
I'm so glad we talked about it too, because I really did it the very next day, and I had been contemplating it, but
That's
our
great.
conversation just really, kind of pushed me over the line.
That's
And
great.
especially with court reporters, it's such a solitary profession.
Yes. No, I mean, I totally get it. That's a great example. But I want to ask you, refresh my memory. You have 100 and some employees.
115 full-time employees.
115. So what do most of them do? I'm talking in terms of task-wise. What do they do?
Well, we interface with the business community, which is responsible for doing a lot of filing, and if they want to be exempt from insurance.
So it's customer service.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
Yes.
About how many?
Medical providers, vocational providers have to file all kinds of progress reports. We have, as we talked about, compliance. We have to go after uninsured companies, so we have to have the staff to find them, and we create dockets that are just all employer compliance, and that's handled by our commissioners. But then somebody has to follow up and make sure they pay and make sure they get insurance.
Again, that I would consider that again kind of customers. It's interaction with people and institutions.
It's a little bit prosecutorial as well.
Gotcha. but to what extent do those folks need credentials? Or do you just train them to do the job?
Yeah, I think I mean, when you get beyond sort of the judges and then the assistants to the judges.
The judges I get,
Yeah.
but the assistants to the judges, what credentials do they have or need? I don't know.
Actually, they don't, actually, I'm gonna have our chief operating officer address that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As far as the credentialing, most of it's on the job training. There are some of our commissioner assistants who do come from previous law firms that they've worked with attorneys who've stood before the commission, which gave them a little bit of a leg in, if you will, a leg up.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's on the job training. We have a training team that actually sits down and we have developed a core training plan. Our director of our hearings division is amazing. She has a vigorous, pretty much a year training program that each of the assistants will go through. Some of them finish before a year, depending on the aptitude, you know, and the level of change that's come through. ComPub actually, in the beginning, kind of set us back a little bit, but now that we're up and running with that, people have gotten acclimated to the system. So the process is going a lot smoother. So we did have to incorporate that type of training. But as far as the skill sets that are required to come in, we do require them to have some kind of customer service skills because we are a customer service environment dealing with a multitude of facets of people, attorneys, injured workers, the medical providers, voc rehab counselors, our commissioners. So we're dealing with internal and external issues. So, you know, the training programs that we put in are, you know, pretty intense.
Gotcha.
And that's across the board from every department, including the mailroom and our processing division as well.
Gotcha. And that is about skills and relevant experience. It's not about credentials. I mean, that's what I was trying to clarify. That's what I was trying to
That
clarify.
is correct.
One last
We have a
question.
lot of employees who haven't gone to college and,
Yes.
and we train them.
I figured that was the case.
Yeah.
So, but I want to be clear, so I understood.
Mhm.
The second question is, the digital platform for court reporting is like a low-tech version of generative AI.
Hmm.
And
Interesting analogy. Yeah.
I mean, well, it's important. Thank you. I mean, but it's important because, I mean, I know the state is looking generally at AI in relation to state agencies and state services, because it seems to me a lot of what your organization does, and a lot of organizations, not all organizations, state, is they basically are doing customer service and managing information. And customer service and managing information are kind of made to order for AI. So I just want to raise that with you. It's early stages in generative AI.
Yeah.
But I know the governor's office is very interested in this. And I think it's the kind of thing that maybe a small agency like yours that has an innovative flair could take a look at.
That's a wonderful idea. And we'd be happy to partner with other agencies who have similar processes.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I am pleased with your progress over there. So with your IT positions, obviously there's always a challenge with the private sector folks. You have a particular partnership with our universities, our community colleges. You bring interns in to deal with that IT component. There may be a way of trying to get them in, have them see what you have to offer. As they grow, right, near all of your, if you look at your locations, you probably got a community college not too far away.
We have
or
plenty,
university,
yes.
absolutely.
And I taught at
So-
one for 20 years.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So that may be an idea for you on the IT side, so you can keep folks coming in and becoming adapted to what you have. So just a
Thank
suggestion.
you. Yeah.
So thank you all.
That, Teresa?
Madam.
We actually do. The director of personnel actually does some research, and there are some type of job fairs, work fairs. They go solicit to colleges. We also did solicit to some of the colleges for the court reporters when we were looking out to them. So they do try to be very creative on how we're tapping into the resources that are outside of the commission to do that. But that's a very great suggestion as far as us, explore that a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all the information. I know one of our problems throughout our whole administration is the turnover ratio that they constantly are having, or even competition. And I think we need to help that in some way. The vacancy I know is a major problem also, but employment and your vast employment of all that you have, I agree with looking at our community colleges. But have you ever had the opportunity to go maybe to our magnet schools or high schools or charter schools or other schools that are out there to maybe have some talented young people that can move from there to go into a trade and have an opportunity to be certified to do a job, or not certified, just be OJT. When you have OJT, I love that more than anything else, because you're doing it, you're having the opportunity to literally have the skill then and there, and then you can move up.
Yeah.
And that's what I did for years. I had that great opportunity, but I think, but how are we going to make sure that you don't deplete your workforce and we keep that, or we can move up, because we need to make sure that we keep our people. And I know it's been a tough thing in our administration.
Yeah.
How can we help you to keep that? Because it's important, because I'll say again, we have skilled young people in our high schools. We need to use our colleges. We need to make sure if there's a different craft or something, that it's maybe they're in the community college and they can get that and move right along with you. And if there's something we can do to help that, please let us know.
I will keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. You mentioned, and thank you for going after bad actors. Since your time taking on as chair, we asked the same question to MIA and MAIF. Do you think the fines that you're legally allowed to put onto those bad actors, are they enough? Are they high enough to actually deter non-compliance, or is that a conversation we should enter into?
Director Burns and I have spent a lot of time talking about this, and we've actually reached an agreement about SB 216, which is going to increase the fines. Right as it's written, it's a flat $25,000 fee, and we're strongly opposed to that, because these businesses that we catch uninsured are very, very small. You think about, the weekend DJ, who hires an assistant to, haul the equipment around. It's not that they couldn't be injured doing that, but imposing a $25,000 fine on someone like that just doesn't make sense. We don't want them to go bankrupt. We want them to go buy insurance. So he and I've reached an agreement to amend the bill to say up to $25,000. But even with that, the bigger problem is they have a faulty collection system. And I think we both agree to that, because the central collections unit just isn't properly incentivized to go after the money that we're awarding. So that to me would be part of the mission of a task force, is to try and tackle that.
And you have a task force bill that's coming?
I have sent, I raised the issue with Senators Bidel, Klassmeyer, Delegates Pruski, and Sample Hughes, and now Delegate Harrison. So they've all said, send us a letter. It sounds like a promising idea, but we'll talk about it. So that letter was delivered this week.
And you referenced before SB 216, is that the one being heard in front of BNT next week, or
Yes,
in finance?
yes. Finance.
In finance.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Rosepep.
I didn't quite follow the central collection problem.
Yeah, so the UEF is sort of saddled with having these awards collected by the Central Collections Unit. So if you think about, these tiny little construction companies and they get a $7,000 fine because they're uninsured, we send that to the UEF. The UEF sends out an assessment, but people don't pay. So they often really struggle with the collections part of this, and that's where they need help.
But that's their job. That's all they do. I mean, they're do you understand what the problem is?
Yeah, I do. And I have my own agency to run. I don't want to sound arrogant and like I'm, trying to run somebody else's agency. But what I've been told is that the Central Collections Unit, that they're paid commissions up to like a certain point, and then they really just sort of lack any incentive to go after the rest of the money. So Director Burns is much more familiar with the details of this. And so I would defer to him when he comes before you next week.
Okay, let me ask you one other question, which is not on folks who get fines because they're uninsured, but folks not being insured. Why do most employers who don't get insurance, why don't they do it? Is they don't know about it, they know about it and intentionally don't do it? They're confused. It's hard to, what's the typical case?
It is all of the above, but one area that we see, particularly with small businesses, they form their company and their business advisor says, become an LLC. because that's a good pass through for tax purposes, which it is. But what they don't tell them is that automatically requires you to exempt yourself from workers' compensation by literally filing a form with the commission. If you don't file that form, you're out of compliance with the law. And it differs from a sole proprietorship where someone, really has no legal underpinning. They don't have to do anything. If they wish to be exempt, they're exempt. But LLCs have to file a form. And there is a huge category of lack of compliance that is just for companies that fail to take that step.
But they should have waived it, or they should?
Yes, they should.
Shouldn't be
Yes,
buying
yes,
insurance.
yes. And we don't want to see people like that fined $25,000.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
But you're saying a lot of the people who are out of compliance are out of compliance for technical reasons, not for substantive reasons.
Well, it's all of the above, but I just think the LLC is, we talk about bad actors, we all do, but these people, they're really not bad actors, and they're a surprisingly large category of people who are out of compliance with the law.
So that's a system fix that should be either by changing the statute or changing the process, should be pretty easily fixed.
Yeah, when they come into court, our commissioner who handles the specialty docket is lenient. There's a small fine,
Well, no, I'm not talking
but she
about-
gets them in compliance by making sure they get the right forms.
Right, but I'm saying getting at the beginning of the process. So when people file for LLCs,
Mhm.
it's straightened out, and that would be with SDAT.
I would think SDAT,
Gotcha.
yes.
Okay,
That's a good idea. Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
I can't remember. You've sparked quite a great deal of conversation, and what normally happens in this room is we find policy
We do.
challenges and
Yes. Mhm.
uncovered in the budget that we pass on to our policy, our colleagues in the policy committee, so we greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll take that back to the commission as well.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you very
thank you.
much.
Okay.
Thank you.
And for the subcommittee, we have, there we go, there it is. We do have the UEF budget on next Thursday, so hold our questions for them for Thursday. Perfect, thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, next we have the Department of Environment and Andrew Gray. Andrew, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll now present the Maryland Department of the Environment's or MDE's fiscal 2025 budget analysis. On page 1, you see the budget increases 2.8 million or 1.3% to $222.2 million. Moving down now, going to first of our managing for results measures. We'll show the exhibit on page 9. This is the information about the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Basic idea is if the line that you're seeing there is below the 0% line, then that's good. And so what we're seeing is that the ozone 8-hour standard was the last standard, National Ambient Air Quality Standard, that had not been met. It was recently met, which is fantastic news for air quality and for the citizens of Maryland. Interesting note here, the Baltimore or the Washington DC region is actually looking for a clean data determination, basically to expunge the non-attainment area for the ozone standard, and Baltimore region would kind of follow along as well with that. So that's the possibility of actually becoming an attainment for the ozone 8-hour standard, which is fantastic. In terms of the second managing for results measure, this is reflected on page 10. This is the child blood lead status. A couple of interesting things happening here. You see the green bars are declining between 2019 and 2021, the calendar data. That's reflecting the children tested for the elevated blood level standard. The reason for that is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There was fewer kids were being tested. People were not going and getting the kind of the health services that previously were. But you are seeing an uptick in the reported blood lead levels at above 5 micrograms per deciliter, between that level and the 10 micrograms per deciliter. The reason for that apparently is that there's a increased outreach to high risk populations. So there's a bit of a sample bias in a sense here, where people with more at risk, the kids with more at risk are being tested and they're being found to have higher levels. So you're kind of finding the issue that you're trying to look for in a sense, kind of biasing the numbers in a way. Some concern here about the data for the child blood lead surveillance reports. The 22 annual report's been delayed. Similar information or concerns for the previous report. The contractor doing the work had some data concerns. So it's a lot of the data is now being reviewed in-house, so it delays the release of that information. MDE notes, though, that it has a process in place to address these concerns. The Department of Legislative Services recommends on page 11 that MDE talk about how they're addressing those concerns, and also talking about how to deal with sampling bias so we can get a clearer picture of whether we're actually seeing an improving trend or whether we're not seeing an improving trend because we're going out and finding the kids who have the high blood lead levels. The third managing results measures on page 12 is Exhibit 3. This is the Public Information Act and permit data. What you're seeing here at the very top level there, the lines, percent of Public Information Act responses issued within 30 days declined between fiscal 22 and 2023. It is expected to decline even further in fiscal 2024 to 89%. Still fairly high, but a decline. And also in terms of the permits processed within the applicable standard time, which is obviously a good thing for citizens of Maryland, there was no data provided for fiscal 2023. On page 13, DLS recommends the MD comment on why there was a decline in the Public Information Act requests within 30 days, and then why there was what the information is for the permit turnaround time. In terms of the proposed efficiencies for fiscal 2024, on page 13, you see there are three there: $1 million for a comprehensive statewide recycling needs assessment, $300,000 to purchase 2 shellfish monitoring boats, and around $300,000 for the development of needs assessment and deployment plan for implementation of the Advanced Clean Trucks regulations. And moving on to Exhibit 4 on page 14, you get the overview of the agency spending. I won't spend too much time here. Just the basic idea is the coordinating office is a large portion of the agency's budget that largely reflects the $28 million for debt service on the Bay Restoration Fund bonds, and $20 million for the Clean Water Commerce Act funding, around $13.1 million for salaries. And then there's also $11 million reflected there for the operations and maintenance grants that go to wastewater treatment plants. Moving on now to the proposed budget change on page 16. Once again, about $2.8 million increase, 1.3%. Some of the larger changes under the personnel expenses, $4.3 million for salary increases and associated fringe benefits, around $900,000 associated with 12 new positions. And we just note here the 11 positions were added in the fiscal 24 during fiscal 24 as the Board of Public Works action, or were not actually funded in the appropriation. Then the turnover increases from 5.66% to 6.58%, reflecting a $900,000 decrease in funding. Under environmental policy is kind of a category of change. You see the stockpile tire cleanups increased by around $3.1 million. My understanding is this is to account for the potential for the needs of the state to clean up a large stockpile in Western Maryland. In terms of another large change there, the bottom of page 16, $1.8 million decrease in mining program contracts. My understanding this is from federal, I think it was Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act or IRA funding that did not actually occur in fiscal 2024. Then moving on to page 17, brief note there, one-time deficiency funding reduces the appropriation by about $1.6 million for the money that we just talked about recently. And then the reductions contingent on the House Bill 245, which we'll talk a little bit more about as an issue here, reflects around a $3.5 million or so decrease in funding if that bill goes into place and brings in the money as expected. Moving now to page 18, just one quick note here about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding. Exhibit 6 on the next page gives you kind of the blow by blow, but DLS does want to kind of get at more of the non-competitive funding too, and kind of the big picture of the federal funding. So ask MD to comment on the status, allocation, budgeted funding, timing of budgeted funds, and planned uses for all of the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act funding. Then moving on to page 20, you have a brief note there about the personnel expenditures budgeting. So when the Maryland Department of the Environment has submitted its actual budgeted personnel sub-objects, kind of reflecting the detail of how the personnel expenditures were allocated out during the year, it continues to put all that information in one sub-object. Basically, we don't get the information we need. The General Assembly restricted money last year, and we did not see the data coming over from the Department of Budget and Management reflecting that fiscal 23 actual allocation out to all the sub-objects as requested. Therefore, DLS is recommending that budget bill language be included again for that purpose. Moving now to page 22, this is on the personnel data. We've already talked about 11 positions were Board of Public Works positions to increase the fiscal 24 working appropriation. Then there's also another net increase of 11 positions between fiscal 24 and 25. The 12 new positions, and then there's 1 transfer position, so 11 net, reflects 7 contractual conversions, and then 5 new positions are intended to implement the building energy performance standards being developed as part of the climate change work. Moving now to page 24 is the first of a couple of issues. This is the Tree Solutions Now Act information. So chapter 645 of 2021, the Tree Solutions Now Act, set that goal, the 5 million trees, native trees by calendar 2031, and at least 500,000 of those trees to be planted in underserved areas. So what does that look like? In Exhibit 7, we see our status or progress since October 26, 2023. And so around 472,000 trees have been planted, most of the trees by the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Agriculture through their funding. The progress towards the kind of the larger goal of the 4.5 million trees, if you will, is around 9.7% of the way. And then there's around 7.3% towards the way of kind of reaching out to and planting trees in those underserved areas. On page 26, Exhibit 8 reflects information about where we are and where we need to be for the trees planted. So if we're trying to get to that 5 million trees planted, we're going to need to see an exponential increase in the work being done. And unfortunately, between fiscal 22 and 23, we actually saw more trees being planted, but fewer being planted in 23 than in 2022. So that's not a good sign if we're trying to get that exponential increase. The current trajectory, it looks like we're getting about 2 million trees, which tees up some of the kind of questions that we have here. The MDE does note that $33 million in federal funding has been leveraged across the administration for the purposes of the Tree Solutions Now Act, and DLS recommends the MDE comment on that funding and on kind of how we're going to get to the plan or how we're going to get to that 2031 goal. Second issue on page 27 concerns restricted funding in the fiscal 2024 budget. This is funding that was restricted for a position to be used to address the implementation of the general permit for discharges of stormwater associated with construction activity. Concern here was that a change in the permit might allow for an increase in the number of permits being issued. DLS recommends the MDE comment on the status of that position and recommends the MDE comment on the rate of individual discharge permits being issued under the new permit relative to the old permit. In the middle of page 27 is the third issue that concerns the climate change funding for the Maryland Department of the Environment. Chapter 38 of 2022, the Climate Solutions Now Act, was a big lift for the Maryland Department of the Environment. They estimated around $3.2 million needed in fiscal 23 and around $1.9 million annually afterwards. The implementation status is reflected on page 28. You see there that they have the building energy performance standards regulations in, but there's some delay. It's potentially by kind of middle of 2024 that they're looking at actually getting those implemented. One point to note here, MDE originally anticipated that it might be around several thousand buildings, which I interpret to be around 3,000 buildings that would be potentially covered by those regulations. Now they're indicating that around 9,300 potentially covered buildings will be involved, which is obviously a substantial increase, and we'll tee up one of the questions we have a little bit later. In terms of the final greenhouse gas emission reduction plans have been submitted. The Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force has been completed and the report submitted. The one thing that really has not occurred yet is the Maryland Commission on Climate Change Working Group. So 4 working groups were required to be put together. MDE has actually sought an extension for this until December 2024 in terms of the work and the reporting done by those groups. Concerns about funding really led to that delay. So that tees up the additional funding needs question here. MDE notes that it was able to leveraged its own resources and federal funding in order to be able to address that $3.2 million need that it kind of pointed out for fiscal 23, and been able to do most of the work other than say that there's 4 work groups as just discussed. The one thing that they do note that they didn't have enough money now for the 4 work groups, which is a little confusing relative to the fact that they asked for that extension. MDE notes that additional funding is needed looking forward for those building energy performance standards regulations due to the fact that there are going to be all sorts of compliance plans with people coming in. So the funding is going to be kind of ramped up for positions and the work in that particular area. DLS recommends MDE comments on the federal and state funding that it's been able to leverage for the work of the Climate Solutions Now Act, and also to comment on whether how the increase for the number of buildings covered by the building energy performance standard regulations kind of impacts their work. And finally, to discuss kind of whether there are any revenues that might be anticipated from the alternative compliance fees that they have as part of the legislation, where they'll be able to kind of defray some of their ongoing costs. The bottom of page 29 is the 4th issue that concerns the compliance and enforcement position quarterly reports. So budget bill language, restricted funding, which has been done for a number of years now until the submission of a report on compliance and enforcement positions and inspections in the Maryland Department of Agriculture and Department of the Environment. The Maryland Department of the Environment asked for and was received an extension to actually submit one final report in April of 2024. But before that extension occurred, they did submit one report in July, which then provides the data that's provided on page 2030. Just noting there that it's helpful here from that data that's being reported to find out where MDE is relative to its evaluations by the federal government partners. For instance, there were concerns about the water supply program, and my understanding is that it was determined that MD should retain primacy over that program, which is a good thing to hear. It's nice to have that reporting to be able to kind of provide that update. DLS recommends the committee narrative be adopted, requesting that that information continue to be included, but not as language restricting funding. The bottom of page 30 and going on is the revised fee, fine, and penalty structures report issue. So last year and for a couple of years now, DLS has pointed out that the Maryland Department of the Environment has needed general fund support to defray the fact that they've had declining special fund revenues, and a number of reasons for that. General Assembly added budget bill language restricting funding until the submission report, which has been provided, and noted a lot of challenges. Basically, fees have not been raised for a number of years, costs have gone up, and you're also seeing the fact that some compliance entities are going out of business. So you have a base level activity needs to continue, but you're not actually receiving the revenues needed to support that activity. And there's also the Air and Radiation Administration is capped at $2 million in terms of the amount of penalty funds it is allowed to retain in the special fund. The MD does report in that report that is a couple of things it was thinking about doing, which now appear to be largely reflected in the legislation House Bill 245, the departmental bill introduced in this session. Exhibit 9 on page 33 gives a big picture look. This is information directly from the Department of Legislative Services fiscal note on this topic. Just like to note here that we're separating out the special fund revenues that are already for revenue for special funds that are in existence. And then there's the separate private dam repair fund, which is created by the bill, and therefore separating that out for the purposes of our discussion here. So around $11.3 million in estimated revenue in fiscal 25, going up to $12.4 million estimated in fiscal 2029. We're talking about the $10.7 million here for the purposes of our discussion. Exhibit 10 kind of gives you a breakdown of what that potential revenue could look like for the various administrations in the Maryland Department of the Environment. So the idea would be you take what the special funds allocation is right now for fiscal 25 allowance, and then basically use the percentages to determine, all right, you have this additional revenue coming in. How much would you have normally gotten from that fund? Well, we'll assume that you're going to get this additional money based on that percentage. Well, that looks like you're going to get obviously a lot more money. For MD is going to get a lot more money than the contingent reductions reflected in the budget. The contingent reductions are around $3.5 million. Whereas the projected revenue around $10.7 million. And one of the large differences here is for the Land and Materials Administration, only a $300,000 contingent reduction of general funds, but $6.9 million in additional money for the administration. So that raises some questions about whether this is backfilling for kind of existing needs, whether this is kind of expanding the operations to address future needs. DLS recommends that the $100,000 restricted be released. There's reports submitted. DLS also recommends that agency comment on some of the things noted in the middle of that page. Exhibit 6 reflects the information about the dam safety program. So the committees requested the submission of a report due to the concerns raised last year in resiliency hearing that the dam safety program was exposed to, well, Marylanders exposed to a high degree of risk in terms of the number of private dams that are not in good repair. And we don't have a good funding source or way to deal with that. So the submitted report notes that there's about 557 active dams, and 162 are currently listed either in need of repair or unsafe, which is obviously a large number. Number of recommendations in the report. The legislation noted on page 36 sort of addresses that, alters the regulatory framework for the program. And the fiscal note for this does reflect that there's 5 new positions needed, 5 dam engineers in fiscal 2025. So the governor's original budget plan, from what I understand, did include those 5 positions, but they were inadvertently left out of the appropriation. There is a contingent reduction, though. So if those positions are added, then there's the funding would be allowed for the $260,000 in special funds. If it's the positions are not added, then there's a reduction of that funding. The 5 positions will be brought in as a supplemental budget item, from what I understand. DLS recommends that MDA comment on the plans for the dam safety program. On the bottom of page 36, the Maryland Used Tire Cleanup and Recycling Fund Annual Report. So $200,000 was restricted for that report due to the concern that the report has not been submitted consistently in recent years. When the funding is restricted, it is submitted. For fiscal 24, just a couple of notes there in terms of the largest remaining scrap tire projects, around approximately 400,000 scrap tires. And GLS recommends that this language be continued based on the kind of responsiveness to that requirement in terms of submitting the report. The eighth and final issue on page 37 discusses the requested information that was not reported in terms of two committee narrative requests. The first one was about posting of federal funding on the line in a report. And the second was about posting a permit violation supporting documents in the Open MDE website. And I do understand that MDE's point of view in terms of the information being extensive on the MDE website, but just as a case point, I was not able to find the Back River consent decree. And I use that as my sort of benchmark because I know that's one of the big ones out there right now. I couldn't find it easily. I know it's on your website, but I could not find it through Open MDE. And so if I can't find it, I'm assuming that most other people cannot, although there's some debate about that, I'm sure. GLS recommends that MDE comment and why it's not comply with those particular requests. Moving now to page 38, the recommended actions, the $200,000 for the Maryland Scrap Tire Annual Reports, restriction of funding until the submission of their report recommendation, restriction of $200,000 until the personnel expenditures are budgeted in the correct statewide sub-objects, as noted previously. And then on page 39, the Enforcement and Inspection Position Strength Assessment Report Committee Narrative. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Incredibly thorough. I do have a couple of questions for you. I believe when I first read this late last night, I did see the text message issue that we had flagged in prior years. Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. So one of the concerns was about the text alert system for environmental accidents was if you had a spill, say back river, would people be notified about it? Was one of the kind of ways to look about this. I think it was also a concern about Curtis Bay in terms of an air release as well, hazardous air release. And so Maryland Department of Emergency Management and MDE kind of looked at this issue in terms of what are some of the opportunities. Each system, no system appears to be perfect. If the system is all-inclusive, has everybody in it, then people are going to opt out because they get information overload, because they always get reports about things. If it's more selective, then you're not going to be able to kind of alert potentially like relatives of people who might be affected. So each has its own challenges, but from what I understand, they do, MD did work out a kind of scenario in terms of looking at some of the triggers for messages being sent out. Although my understanding is the information was not provided about what those triggers were going to be exactly and the status of that kind of messaging system. So that would be something potentially to follow up on.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then on the fees and fines, and I'm going to go ahead and thank the secretary for taking our concerns seriously and seriously enough that we have a bill this year that I'm very excited for. But Andrew, on the math of that bill and the fiscal note, a long report. So what is it those fees currently bringing in versus what when we raise them?
Well, so the additional revenue is exhibit 9, page 33.
33. Thank you.
So that's the big picture fiscal note showing that overall in fiscal 25, the estimate is around $11.3 million in additional funding coming in. So the lower left-hand corner.
Okay.
It's $11.3 million. And then going to fiscal 2029, the estimate was increased to $12.4 million.
Thank you. But what is this in fiscal 24, all things being standard right now without the bill, what's it bringing in?
I would have to go back and check for each of those special funds.
I'm just curious what the difference looks like.
What the base plus this additional? Okay, so I'd have to.
You don't have to answer that. I'm just curious.
I can look into that for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions for Andrew? Okay, Madam Secretary, welcome, and your team.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Good to see all of you again, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk about our budget. For the record, I am Serena McElwain, Secretary of the Environment. So the $22 million operating budget for fiscal year 2025 is mainly a baseline budget with minor adjustments to ensure that we're able to uphold our mission to protect land, water, and air. This first year, for me as Secretary, my priority was to take a critical look at our budget and to analyze the state of operations at MDE evaluate our resources, and last, determine where we can improve our services and efficiencies throughout the agency. I looked into some of the concerns that were raised in the hearings last year when I first started regarding, there was a lot of things, but in particular, the lagging enforcement efforts, too many extended permits, limited inspections, and high vacancy rates. I heard it all. So this budget proposal will ensure that we are able to have the right people and the right jobs doing the right work at the right time. In a general sense, this budget reflects a strategy where we're redirecting funds from underused programs and adjusting spending on other programs to make sure that we have balance and sustainability. So this is a season for discipline, I think, for all of us, for the administration, for my agency. And we're committed to making sure that we're operating efficiently and effectively for taxpayers. And regarding resources for MDE, our agency just did not have enough sufficient resources to do our jobs, to adequately run the program. So we're really grateful that last year we received additional positions that were allocated, that we use those positions to improve enforcement efforts that were related to the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act. The 78 new permanent positions that we did receive, they were assigned to some of the key areas for MDE, which is the climate program, enforcement, water supply, and wastewater permits. This budget proposal adds 17 additional positions, some of which will be devoted to implementing and launching the Building Energy Performance Standards program and also improving our dam safety program. And I just need to emphasize, and I know, Andrew, you mentioned it, but the importance of having enough resources for the dam program is really, really important. We need to be able to inspect and of course, we regulate more than 500 dams. And a failure would be really critical. So it's just important that we have enough inspectors. And as you pointed out, Andrew, there's so many of them that need to be repaired. And we don't have enough funding right now to even help homeowners, because a lot of homeowners, people own dams. It's not just big businesses. So we want to be able to help them. It's important. Last year, I heard you loud and clear when you pointed out that we need to take a real deep dive look at fees for MDE because it seems that they have been too low and just too low for far too long. And so at the direction of this committee, we did fully evaluate our fee structure, and we did confirm exactly what you thought, that we were desperately in need of raising fees in order for us to cover the services that we consider to be self-supported. We didn't have enough. So there's no reason why we should be depending on general funds for programs that should be self-supported. So we addressed this issue with the omnibus fee bill proposal, HB 245, and if it's approved, it definitely will significantly reduce our reliance on general fund revenues. And it's also going to bring in additional resources to the department to help us cover some of the unfunded mandatory regulatory programs that we have. So this legislation is really consistent with the principle that we all know, the polluter should pay. And so that's why this is so important, this bill. And again, it will generate over $11 million for the department. But we're not just relying on state funds and fees. We're also maximizing federal funding and ensuring that we take advantage of every single dollar that's available for federal dollars that's available. And Governor Moore, he expects this administration to take full advantage also of federal funding. And because of his support and expectations of me as secretary and the entire administration, we have already secured almost $330 million in federal funding since Governor Moore took office. We're also ensuring that we are spreading those funds to communities that need it the most. And we're ensuring that we're adhering to President Biden's administration requirements that we use 40% of federal funding for underserved and overburdened communities. But I'm happy to say we devote much more than 40%. So that's something that we will continue to do, because one of my key priorities is to ensure that we're listening, really listening to communities, and that we're bringing them to the table when we're talking about regulations or regulatory changes that affect them. So it's really important that we start bringing them in with us. And so we've been doing a good job at doing that. And last, we have met the requirements of the Climate Solutions Now Act, which directed MDE to develop a plan that would ensure that we meet the aggressive climate goals that are called out in the Climate Solutions Now Act. So a few months ago, as most of you are aware, we did release the state's first climate pollution reduction plan, and it lays out a roadmap for reaching those climate goals. But as we all know, and as in the report, implementing that, the plan is not going to be cheap, and it's not free. So we're looking for ways to be creative with funding, and we're going to be working with the General Assembly. I would love this administration, and me as well, to figure out how do we fund the plan. So we do have, our intention is to apply for, just so that you know, a $195 million grant from US EPA for climate pollution reduction. So that's another step in the right direction in getting funding. In addition, today, the governor had a press conference where he talked about redirecting a proposal to redirect $90 million in the budget request to support the plan that I just talked about. So we also, in addition to the 90 million, we're also anticipating, and we get additional funding from the federal government anyway. So we have the 90 million now, plus the additional federal funding that we anticipate coming in, as well as the grant we plan to apply for. So we will continue to dive deep into our budget at MDE so that we can better align resources for our shared goals, which I just mentioned, which is climate change, environmental justice, enforcement, and compliance and organizational analysis. Last point I'll make in terms of the DLS analysis of MDE's operating budget, I would like to just personally thank you, Andrew, again, for your thorough analysis. You actually had me thinking in different ways. I thought, wow, I didn't think of that. So it's just incredible. And you really did help us in being a little more strategic in how we think about some of these things. So thank you for that. You did ask us to comment on a couple of items, and we've already submitted that written response to you, but we're here to address any concerns that you may have. That concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your report. If he can't find it, we certainly can find it, right? So
Yeah, that was eye-opening.
yeah, the private dam thing. I mean, and I appreciate your work on that, because who knew we had that many. What we do know is in the areas that each and every one of us represents, we have the challenges, the major dam, Chesapeake, Potomac, Patuxent in Baltimore. I mean, so we are the folks, we're your environmental folks. I do appreciate, Madam Secretary, our partnership on Senate Bill 96. We look forward to it continuing to work toward, what we need to take care of, everything from EJ challenges, which I don't think they are as challenging once we begin to meet them. I think folks will come along and working in those overburdensome areas. The last thing I'll say is thank you very much for your support with Eagle Harbor. That means a lot to us. The federal and local and state support. We have Chalk Point up the road from there, and that they're going to cycle out. That partnership with the EPA, these brownfields. We not only want the pollutant sources that we've used over the decades or longer to be gone, but we want to make sure that we can turn those into livable, viable areas and hopefully economic development. So appreciate your partnership there. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator hit on one of the important things we were talking about last year about the private dams, and I appreciate him bringing that up, and I know how important it is. Because again, that was something that we kind of like were hit and didn't really know much about. Now we know so much more about, and I think it's important that we continue to work and to be ahead of that. But I want to also have the opportunity to thank you for your work and for your partnership in Beck River and the wastewater treatment plant, knowing that's the biggest one in the state of Maryland. We worked together to make a difference. We had some federal partnership and local, but our state really made a great stand. We were presented very well. We had community, and I wanted your partnership and some of the people that worked with us. We had good communication with some of our nonprofits that worked with us. And our other partners that were in the community, very transparent, which helped and made the difference. Because, you know, hidden things are going to be said. Transparency makes all the difference in the world. And our community was even a part of that also, working with our nonprofits. So they were literally out there in their water area, in their backyard, doing tests themselves privately, and then getting the result, and the result matched, which made the difference. So partnering in that helped a lot. And I just want to say, I hope we can continue to work on that and assess it later on to make sure we're still doing the same and being the same and being a partner with our nonprofits. So I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I got questions.
I knew I wouldn't get away with it that easily.
Yeah, no, I mean, we all care about our local areas, and I'm always impressed with my colleagues know so much about things I know nothing about, because they know their districts very, very well. So I'm going to go the total opposite direction. First question I want to talk about is the tree planting. What's the big picture as to why it's so hard?
Why it's so hard to get 5 million
Yeah,
trees
yeah,
planted?
yeah.
Oh, that's a very good question, and my deputy has the answer.
Okay, good.
Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Dorsey, Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment. Thank you very much for that question. I think it is hard. MDE plays an important role of facilitating the implementation, leveraging resources. And I think in the first couple of years, what you have seen is not just actually the planting of trees, which has happened, but the building of programs, the leveraging of resources. So our partners at the Chesapeake Bay Trust, who are focusing on the urban tree planting, as we mentioned, leverage the money that we were able to provide, that you provided, to ensure that they were eligible for federal funding, and they did that in a grand way. Our partners at DNR have really committed, and you'll see not just the commitment of resources and staffing. They staffed up their the Forestry Service, but they have really committed to 5 million trees as an agency. And the Department of Agriculture, our other implementing partner, has also put in place the foundation to ensure that we're able to accelerate the tree planting very quickly over the next couple of years. So what you saw immediately was trees in the ground, but you also saw the foundation of programs to accelerate that tree planting.
Can you give me a little more nuance on that, though? I mean, so they've hired a bunch of people to do stuff. It's kind of what you're saying.
I think, again, depending on which agency
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
talking about, they've partnered with groups.
Okay.
They've gone after funding and received that funding, leveraged the funding that we have to get more funding. They've hired people to put trees in the ground, and they're building the resources to accelerate that.
What I'm trying to understand, though, is the constraint people to do the work? Is the constraint the trees? Is the constraint? I'm trying to understand what the constraints
Yeah.
are.
Thank you. No, thank you for that question. I think that's site specific, right? It's different. The answer may be different if you're working in downtown Salisbury or Baltimore City or Cumberland, rather than in an agricultural environment. So I think the challenges differ depending on where you're trying to place those trees. If you're putting them on private property versus public property.
Senator, can I suggest, because this is both, it's MDE, DNR, and MDA, can I suggest we ask the three departments put their heads together to answer your question?
That's fine.
Okay, is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay,
I mean,
thank you.
I really would like to understand what the roadblocks are so that either you can fix the roadblocks or we can fix the roadblocks.
Let me just add, I think the roadblocks you're referring to is what was in the analysis and what we know, where it's showing that it's going to take a long time to actually catch up and get the number of trees planted based on the rate that it's going up in
Right.
that chart. Right. So it's a valid point. We will work with the.
That's great. No, that's
undersecretary.
fine.
I figured, I just wanted to make sure I understood what you needed.
Yeah,
Okay.
and happy to talk offline if you need clarification. but-
Okay.
So that was number one. Number two is about $50 million of your proposed budget is general fund, I think. Have I got that right?
About that, 54.
54, yeah, so
Mhm.
it's around 50.
Mhm.
Most of your budget is not, most of your budget is special fund and federal.
Yes.
And my question is, what are the big buckets that the general fund money pays for? As opposed to federal money, as opposed to special fund? What is it either you can't use a special fund or federal fund money for that you need general fund money for?
We're gonna have our budget.
Yeah, so a lot of it would be salaries for, sorry, Jeff Fretwell, MDE, I work on budget at MDE.
Yeah.
So salaries, and there's some programs where we have staff working on permit issues and things like that where we don't charge fees and we can't charge fees. So then we need general funds for those types of programs. We're working with local governments on local government permits, which we recognize is very important, but it's something that we can't capture our costs for those permits. So the general fund subsidizes that. So it's things like that. We can get you a list specifically.
Yeah, maybe if you could do that. I mean, what I'd like is a breakout of $54 million. Why we don't have special funding of this, or why we don't have federal funding of this, why we have federal. I mean, exactly do that at kind of a big bucket level. That'd be great.
Yeah, we can do that. And we are, like the secretary said, aggressively going after additional federal funds. So to the extent we're successful with that, that would help us additionally. And then the fee bill also helps some too, but we can get you a breakdown on the $50 million.
That would be great. Yeah. Last question, which is even a bigger question. And I mean, I confess I have not read the full report of the $1 billion plan. But given that that's like the biggest budget issue in terms of this subcommittee, the environment, as you point out, for the foreseeable future, I guess, why is it going to cost $1 billion a year?
Yeah.
And let me just frame the question. One is, why is it going to cost $1 billion a year? Number one. Number two is, where are you in terms of figuring out, because the report laid out some options, but didn't really come up with a financing plan. Where are you all in terms of coming up with okay, we want $1 billion a year. Here's how we suggest doing it.
May I now? Okay, all right, I want to make sure.
Yeah, please, no, that's
let
great,
you
thank
speak.
you.
Okay, well, the first thing is the plan itself, what we were required to do at MDE was to develop the strategy, the plan, the roadmap to get us to meeting the climate goals.
Yeah.
Not the funding part. So that's why we put in options in the report of things that we all can think about together, the General Assembly, the administration, ideas for us finding the funding. So I think that kind of helps with the overall answer to how are we going to figure out the funding. The $1 billion climate change, I think your question was, what does that mean? Where is all the funding going to and why is it 1 billion?
Yep.
Okay. So the way is, well, first of all, in order to move the state and consumers to move to do what we need them to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we have to make sure we have incentives for them to do it. That's consumers, that's the building industry. So we need to electrify in order to meet those goals. People aren't going to do it if you don't give them money. We can't just say, hey, you need to, when you're replacing your furnace, we need you to replace it with a heat pump. Without funding, we have to help. So Maryland, the state of Maryland, we need to make sure we have money set aside for that. So some of the money in the $1 billion, it will cover a lot of the incentives. So for example, the money we have now to incentivize people to buy an EV is so small, smaller than a whole lot of states. It's like little teeny bit, and it runs out after 2 months. So that's not enough. So we need to push a whole lot of millions of dollars. I'm talking $200 million just to make sure we have enough incentives. It's the same thing with the building industry as well. With BEPS that we have, that's a big lift for industry. And so part of that $1 billion is to help them too, put money aside to help the building industry do what they need to do to start converting to electrification. And then we need money to help low and moderate income families. So a lot of the money will go toward them as well. This transition, sometimes when you're really pushing out strong environmental goals like we have, we want to make sure we leave no one behind. And so a lot of the funding too is going to be set aside to help them with utility costs that may go up or down when you're, initially putting heat pumps in and getting started with this transition. Sometimes there is a slight hike, and we want to make sure that we're offsetting that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I'll end it after this comment question. So essentially you're saying that the economic value of the changes is negative, and therefore it has to be subsidized. That we're not, whether it's the buildings or it's the drivers or whoever the economic actor is going to be worse off economically by making these investments, and therefore we need to subsidize them. Am I understanding the math essentially? Is that the big picture?
They won't be worse off.
Well, they wouldn't unless we subsidized them.
They're still not going to be worse off.
Okay.
I mean, it is an impact when you're moving in this direction where you're transitioning from really transitioning to a green economy. That's a lot. When you're electrifying your entire house, think about it. Your appliances, your heat pumps, you're going from a gas car to an electric car. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of transitioning. I'm sorry, I don't read that.
I mean, it also accelerates it so that we meet the Climate Solutions Now Act.
Yeah, so exactly. So we do have to accelerate what we're doing as well. So you have to inject a lot of money into doing what we need to do in order to meet the goals. That's just what happened. It's not just Maryland. It happens in every single state. The state and hopefully federal, we can get even more. If you don't have money to push the market, you will not meet your
But there are
goals.
different ways. We don't need to continue this right now. But there were different ways to push the market. We push the market all the time with regulation. This is pushing the market with subsidy. And there are all kinds of different ways to push the market. That's why I want to get your big picture explanation for it, because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about it, and frankly, we're very surprised.
Yeah, we can.
That popped out.
Yeah, we push it with regulations. We certainly have that authority, but pushing with regulations without funding is not a good combination, and it does not work. It will not work. I can put out all the regulations right now, but without helping Marylanders and supporting the economy, it is not going to work. But the good thing is, once we start this transition, this green economy, this whole transition, so many jobs will be available because of this transition. And the modeling suggests we have about 27,000 jobs, green jobs that will be available. And the cost is going to go down for electricity bills and all gas bills for your car. So it balances. So it's a good investment into the people, and we have to do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Senator and Madam Secretary. Do you have a finance person here? I kind of want to get to the bottom of the personnel issue Andrew's brought up for 2 years. If we could figure that out, Jeff, if that's you.
Yes.
Sorry to put you in the hot seat, but can we try to figure?
That's why he's here.
Yeah, it's been 2 years now of this DBM situation. Can you explain, please?
Yes, so Andrew's correct that we don't have the breakout in the sub objects the way that he wants to.
Okay.
And we're gonna fix that.
Okay.
I'm not gonna fix it on the spot with you guys here, but I'll work with Andrew
Okay.
and do that.
Okay.
So,
And then-
and DBM
In future years, so we
will
don't.
be submitted correctly.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, Madam Secretary, again, really appreciate the work you and your team have put into the dam issue, which, you know, when we found out about it last year was just terrifying. So thank you. Appreciate your work on the fees. What other emerging, you've been on the job for a year now, what other emerging problems? Let's put climate aside, because that's a big one for all of us. But what are you seeing in the department that needs to be addressed that we can work together with you to address?
Let's see. Well, we have so many, not problems, but there's
Opportunities. There you
challenges
go.
and opportunities.
There you go.
Thank you for that. Let me think about that in terms of how this committee can be helpful. I think if we were to get this budget approved that we have in front of us, that's going to help us with most of the challenges that I see today, which is, like I said, the dams. We have the climate issues, we have enforcement issues, we need more inspectors. All of those things are just so critical to keep us moving and running and keep the programs going.
Okay.
And environmental justice is obviously at the top of everything that we do.
Absolutely. I think if we could continue to work with you and MDM on the text alert issue, because it is really important for Senator
Yes.
Stallings' district, all of our districts. I think, you know, we need to be transparent as a government, even when things break down, especially when things break. So would love to continue working on that with you.
No, I think that's really important. And
Yeah.
I meant what I said when I read some of the questions that came out of the analysis. A lot of things made me realize issues that I didn't know about. I mean, it's only been a year, so it helped me into looking at some of the other areas that needs a little attention, and we'll definitely address that. And some of the other ones as well.
Great. Thank you.
A lot of the
Senator Stallings, closing thought.
Thank you. Just, it's so important to have the right resources. And when we found out that some of our areas of our wastewater treatment plant didn't have the right resources, and we didn't even know where to go, which was a major problem. And trying to get with we talked with our community colleges and what type of class they need to be, certifications, chemists, whatever they need to have. If you need to know more about a control room and know every instrument that's there, it was important to find these things out. Maybe after the fact we did, but we need to be ahead of that. So if there's other resources that would help us out to work together, we need to know these things and be ahead of it. And we can, and again, I think we've come a long way. I think we're compliance, which is good. And that's important to continue to be in that place. And again, I cannot stress enough, the assessing is so important. We need to have more assessments to make sure that they're not out of compliance and we won't get those complaints. But having the right tools and getting with our colleges, our community colleges, or just other schools that are doing the same. We need to be way advanced in this. And the only way we can do that is just make sure we have the right tools and the right people so we can make sure that if we are depleted, which we were, we can find these right people to do these jobs. And I'm more than able to work with you.
Thank you.
I think we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, next and finally, we have Madeline Miller to present the Department of Juvenile Services budget. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon. My name is Madeline Miller, and today we'll be presenting the DLS operating budget analysis for the Department of Juvenile Services. The allowance grows 3.8% compared with the working appropriation to $338.6 million. Over 3/4 of the change can be attributed to personnel salary enhancements. Discussion of the department's performance measures begins on page 4 of the document. Complaints can be made to DJS by law enforcement, schools, parents, and members of the community. Arrests and referrals from school resource officers are the primary way that youth become involved with DJS and with the juvenile justice system. Juvenile arrest trends for calendar 2018 to 2022 are shown in Exhibit 1. Total juvenile arrests over the 5 years are down 44.5%, though arrests increased by 32.7% between calendar 21 and 22. Complaints to DJS are categorized by the most serious offenses involved in the referral, and data from fiscal 2023 is summarized in Exhibit 2. Of the 12,388 complaints, 65% are related to alleged misdemeanors. Approximately 4.1% of complaints were related to child in need of supervision petitions. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the total number of complaints received by DJS over the past decade and complaint dispositions. Complaints rose 14.9% between fiscal 2022 and 2023, and they rise an additional 7.4% in year-to-date data. The estimated increase would still represent a 10.7% decrease from the fiscal 2020 or pre-pandemic level, or part pandemic. Each type of complaint rose between fiscal 22 and 23. The share of formal cases that require court intervention made up 34.5% of cases in fiscal 2023, compared with 31.4% in fiscal 2022. A slightly smaller proportion of cases were closed at intake. The non-residential placement population includes youth who are receiving informal supervision, who are on probation, or are in aftercare programming. And non-residential population trends are shown in Exhibit 4 on page 7. Between fiscal 2014 and 2022, the total non-residential caseload decreased 75.6%. Caseloads increased 2% between fiscal 2022 and 2024. Informal caseloads will likely increase in the working appropriation as efforts to divert youth from residential placements continue. DJS diverts youth to more therapeutic placements when possible, such as an alternative to detention program. When a youth enters the juvenile system, DJS personnel administer the detention risk assessment instrument to produce a recommendation of whether the youth should be detained, placed in ATD, or released. The tool was last updated in December 2022. If it determines that a youth would be best placed in an alternative to detention, there are 3 main options: community detention, with or without electronic monitoring, evening reporting centers, and shelter care. Exhibit 5 on page 9 shows cases by ATD program category in fiscal 2023. Electronic monitoring is the most frequently used program at 53.5% of cases. The detained average daily population consists of 3 smaller populations: the secured detention predisposition, the secured pending placement, and the adult court authorized detention populations. Changes to the detention population are shown in Exhibit 6 on page 10. Since overall complaints rose 74.5% between fiscal 21 and 23, the courts have been fully operational. The ADP has risen to 262.4 youth in fiscal 24 year-to-date data. This figure is 3.8% higher than in fiscal 2020, even as the predisposition and pending placement population, average daily populations, remain 44.5% and 2% below their fiscal 2020 levels, respectively. The adult court population now accounts for 61% of the detained population. The growth in this group has contributed to higher utilization rates within DJS detention facilities, as will be discussed later on in this analysis. Compared to pre-pandemic levels in fiscal 2019, the average length of stay for the predisposition, pending placement, and adult court authorized populations have increased by 10.6, 79.1, and 5.6% respectively. This is depicted in Exhibit 7 on page 11. Like the detention population, the population of youth in DJS committed residential programming has also increased. State-run committed residential facilities do not provide adequate capacity to accommodate the number of youths requiring out-of-home placements, nor do they provide the full complement of programming required to address the variety of treatment needs for the committed population. To that end, DJS contracts with private in-state and out-of-state vendors. Exhibit 8 shows the committed residential ADP for each of the possible placements in between fiscal 2014 and in year-to-date data. The committed population rose by 4.5% in fiscal 2023, with almost all of the growth coming from placements in state-operated facilities. Growth is expected to continue in fiscal 24. Per diem placements are programs operated by private providers, and the state pays for only the number of days that a youth is actually placed in the program. Since fiscal 2014, the private per diem average daily population has fallen by 90.1% to 58.58 youths in fiscal 2024 year-to-date data. The out-of-state ADP increased by 3.8 youths, and this population is so small that results in 49.4% growth in fiscal 2023. Out-of-state placements accounted for just 8.3% of the total committed ADP in fiscal 2023. DJS also provides aftercare and reentry services to youth in the juvenile justice system. As the youth leave the juvenile justice system, they face several challenges in joining their communities once again. That includes re-enrolling in school, finding work, or addressing somatic or behavioral health needs. The reentry process is managed by regional reentry teams, and families of committed youth are invited and encouraged to participate in the reentry planning process. The outcomes of the follow-up visits between DJS staff and previously committed youth are documented and reported to the department as shown in Exhibit 9 on page 14. The percentage of families of committed youth who felt informed during their child's commitment and reentry process was not reported in fiscal 23. Going forward, the department will instead report the percentage of youth and families meaningfully engaged in the case planning process as measured by a survey of youth and families. Only one of the other 5 measures improved since fiscal 22, and only 2 measures have improved compared to fiscal 2019 or the first year of available data. DJS notes that while this data is accurate, some may be missing. Fewer than anticipated youth reentry checklists were completed in fiscal 2023. Additional strategic reentry measures will be reported in fiscal 24 as the department re-examines the measures that it wishes to report on in the future. Youth recidivism rates within 2 and 3 years of release have decreased as detailed in Exhibit 10 on page 15. The decline of the rearrest rates suggests that policing practices are rearresting youth at a slower rate, while the decline in the readjudication and recommitment rates suggests that the juvenile justice system has been effective in reducing youth involvement in the judicial system. One explanation for why youth are beginning to be rearrested at a slower rate is that total youth arrests decreased in calendar 2020 and 21, likely in connection to the pandemic. The rearrest rate within 3 years decreased from 66.3% in fiscal 2019 to 59.5%, and the readjudication rate decreased from 30% to 27% in the same period. The recommitment rate also fell, and the declines in the 2-year recidivism metrics extending to the 3-year recidivism measures is a positive indicator. Now moving to discussion of the department's budget. Changes to the working appropriation are discussed on pages 16 and 17. Major changes include the addition of funds to ROCA and the launch of the Safe Summer Initiative. DJS received $1 million in general funds through Section 19 of the fiscal 2024 budget bill to expand the services of ROCA Inc. around the state. In addition to the $2 million general fund mandate for the organization's operations, the fiscal 25 allowance includes the $2 million in mandated funding. The fiscal 24 working appropriation also grew by $3.1 million in federal ARPA funds for the Safe Summer Initiative. DJS coordinated with the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy, the Department of Human Services, and the Department of Human Services to allocate these funds. The spending plan for the initiative is shown in Exhibit 11 on page 17, and that includes $5 million total, though the initiative is expected to last for the duration of fiscal 2024 despite its name. One of the elements funded through DJS, the Thrive Academy, is expected to expand operations and is funded with general funds in fiscal 2025 as well. DLS asked that the department comment on how ARPA funds are being used by local governments to support the initiative, as this information cannot be provided over the summer. An overview of agency spending is provided with the pie chart on page 18 of the $338.6 million, approximately 73% supports personnel expenses. Youth programming, including the purchase of care services and youth education programming, accounts for about 11%. The remaining 17% are allocated to contractual services, supplies, and equipment, and other operating costs. Growth between fiscal 24 and 25, that $12.5 million, is explained in the proposed budget change chart on pages 19 and 20. Much of the increase is attributable to net increases in the department's personnel budget, but other large changes include the net expansion of the Thrive Academy, which adds increases by $2.7 million, and higher medical care costs for youth. Growth in these areas is offset by lower costs of interagency agreements and the removal of funds for the purchase of instructional materials and library supplies. As shown in Exhibit 14 on page 21, medical care costs rose 46.3% or $1.6 million, corresponding with the 33% increase in the detention population and the 4.5% increase in the committed youth population Actual expenditures rose 74.4% between fiscal 22 and 23. The allowance is budgeted based on actual spending. So for fiscal 23 data. So in its testimony, DJS should comment on whether a deficiency is required to meet the costs of medical care for youth in fiscal 24, or how funding will be realigned. The budget also grows by approximately 2.7 million for additional Thrive Academy expenses. The Thrive Academy is a community-based gun violence prevention program and case management model. Youth who are identified as being high risk of being a victim or perpetrator of gun violence are provided with services such as life coaches, financial incentives, work and service stipends, relocation assistance, and college tuition or vocational training. In the Thrive Academy model, youth in need of services are identified, and DJS contracts with organizations in different regions to provide services. DJS launched the program on September 1st in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. In January, operations began in Anne Arundel and in Prince George's counties. Across the 4 jurisdictions, there are 49 youths who are enrolled. We ask that DJS comment on how it will procure services in fiscal 25, the expected youth participation in fiscal 25, the estimated cost of the program per participant in both years, and how the use of the Thrive Academy will be evaluated over time for efficacy and affordability. 2 additional sources of spending growth include the Child, Juvenile, and Adult Management System transition, which is an IT system the department is moving to use, and the replacement of phone systems that were end of life nearly 2 decades ago. A review of personnel data can be found on pages 23 and 24. The allowance reflects a reduction of 20 regular long-term vacant positions and a net reduction of 11.5 contractual positions. Turnover expectancy increases to 7.72% in the allowance compared with 5.75% in the working appropriation. Based on the department's hiring rate, this is a cost-saving measure and a better representation of departmental needs. However, the department's overtime needs are under budgeted in fiscal 2024. The allowance for overtime increases by 3.4 million to bring funding approximately in line with fiscal 23 actual spending and to account for higher salaries. DJS reports that it is reviewing strategies to realign existing funds to address the projected deficit. In total, personnel expenses increased by approximately 9.7 million. The issues section begins on page 25, and the first 2 relate to the department's strategic planning documents. At the end of last month, DJS released the 5-year strategic plan with 4 broad goals to improve public safety, improve youth outcomes, build partnerships to improve all outcomes, and achieve organization excellence. DJS also presented 11 strategies that are supported with roadmaps to meet those 4 goals. Many of the strategies are addressed in the fiscal 24 and 25 budgets, including creating an intensive intervention for youth at risk of gun violence involvement, which is the Thrive Academy. All of the V's tripped me up there, I'm sorry. Create and implement a comprehensive community investment strategy and right-size spending and space. Funding is provided in the DPA in fiscal 25 for actions that support the goal of building partnerships to improve all outcomes. There is 7 million for the enhanced services continuum and 5 million for the community investment initiative. DJS should provide a spending plan for this funding enhancement in fiscal 25 and describe the services needed by youth in these populations. Department should also comment on how it will work with DPSCS and DHS to launch the opportunity networks called for in the Community Investment Initiative, how the site locations will be chosen, and how it will procure services for the Community Investment Initiative. The second issue relates to capital planning. Though ADP for detained and committed youth remains below its pre-pandemic levels, actions taken by DJS in recent years have reduced the total bed space available for both population types, as shown in Exhibit 15. Between fiscal 2019 and 24, on different occasions, facilities have been closed or populations were moved to bring youth closer to their communities, to provide better service provision for female youth, to address staffing issues, and because of poor facility conditions. For some context, in fiscal 21, there were 7 open detention facilities with a total capacity of 383 youth and 6 open committed facilities with a total capacity of 110 youth. Currently, the detention capacity is 312 and committed capacity is 84. The department has not required the use of capital funds to manage these changes in its bed capacity, though funding in the fiscal 25 capital budget is included for a committed treatment center, which would add 24 beds for male youth in a few years. The current capital improvement program is shown in Exhibit 16 on page 27. Given the different population characteristics and the reduced capacity, the most recent facilities master plan from 2015 is no longer aligned with the department's needs. And as stated in its 5-year plan, DJS is in the process of assessing all facilities and will have a new facilities master plan completed by December 31st of this year. DLS recommends withholding $100,000 in general funds pending the submission of the FMP by January 1, 2025. The third issue relates to out-of-home placement wait times. DJS is the second largest youth placing agency in Maryland for youth who require an out-of-home placement. And during the 2023 session, Budget Committees requested that DJS provide a report on the wait times that the youth it places experience before receiving a community-based placement, hospitalization, family home placement, or a non-community-based placement. Data was requested for calendar 2023. DJS reports that average length of stay for youth pending placement to an out-of-home placement was 52.2 days in fiscal 2023. Wait times for each type of out-of-home placement were not provided. The report was submitted over a month late, and though it contained information relevant to the request, the data was not provided in the requested format. DLS therefore recommends the committees adopt language withholding $50,000 in fiscal 25 general funds pending the submission of an updated report by January 1st, 2025. The recommended actions from my analysis are listed starting on page 30. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, on page 15,
Mm-hmm.
Exhibit 10, the recidivism rates. I'm trying to understand. So looking at 2020, 3 years out, the first line, rearrest juvenile adult readjudication.
So that would be an indication of the percentage that experience additional involvement, and because of the age of the population, someone may change in that.
No, I get the juvenile to adult thing. What I'm trying to understand is this says that almost 60% of these are kids who left juvenile services during 2020. That's my first question. Is that what that means?
So if you're looking at, I'm sorry, this is a confusingly set up table. So if you're looking at which year?
Maybe better, I gather it's a juvenile services chart. Maybe it's better to address this question to the juvenile services folks.
Why don't you try asking? So you're looking at 2020.
Yeah, you're looking at 2020. It shows 2 years and 3 years later of data. So that would be 2022 and 2023. 2021 only has, it's only 2023 now. So there's only 2 years of data available.
I understand that. I'm just, I'm just trying to take one year so we have all the data. So, but this is 59.5% of kids who left juvenile service supervision during 2020. Is that what the base is? The denominator?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Okay. And then the numerator is the kid was rearrested.
Mm-hmm.
Or what does adult readjudication mean?
I believe that as you go through the justice system, you could experience something like probation.
Yeah.
The second one is
Oh.
adjudication is what they call it in juvenile court when you get convicted. So the second, so 29.4 was under 2017 is how many kids were either re-adjudicated or convicted.
Okay.
Just need a little space between those two.
Oh, I see. Then I did misunderstand that. That's helpful, but I still don't quite understand the concept. So I get rearrested, but readjudication means what exactly?
It's a juvenile word for conviction.
It's a juvenile word for conviction. So you were either rearrested or convicted as a juvenile.
No, you have to be rearrested to be so. Yes. You can't be re-adjudicated unless you.
No, I understand that. So I'm trying to understand. So re-adjudication goes to conviction.
Correct.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Huh.
No, I don't, I misunderstood that entirely. Okay, no, we're getting there. We're making a lot of
Yeah.
progress.
Okay.
So the rearrest is again, I'll come back to the 2020, just because the most recent, is 59.5% were rearrested. Of those, 27 were convicted and 16.7 were put in the hoosegow somehow. I mean, okay. So the implication of that is that of the 59.5, the majority were not convicted.
Correct.
Does that mean they were acquitted? Or does that mean probation? Or does that mean something else?
Could be case dismissed. A lot of cases get dropped because the prosecutors don't think they have enough evidence to.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm trying to ask. But I mean, are there
So it's not an
categories?
acquittal, it's just the case got dismissed. Almost nobody ever goes to trial, and of those, very few get acquitted. So I just want to be precise. Most of the times people don't get convicted, it's because their cases were dismissed.
Cases dropped. Okay, well, I just ask both the department, I guess the department numbers. I'd love to see the numbers broken out of between the 59.5% and the 27.0%. What are the big categories of what happened to them? Thank you. Appreciate it.
No, this is a really telling chart. I think
If you understand it.
I do. Yeah. But
No, I agree.
it depends on what we look at as success, but certainly 60% of kids who had some type of interaction with DJS are rearrested. I mean, it's never going to be zero, but 60% is unacceptably high. And I know we're going to dig into that. And that's just a value statement, not a question. Other questions for Madeline?
I know.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, sorry to start you off hot, but
It's juvenile crime. I
Okay.
knew it wasn't gonna be cool. Good afternoon, Chair Elfreth and members of the committee. My name is Vinnie Schiraldi, for the record. I am the Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Services. At the tables with me today is Tiffany Johnson, Chief Administrative Officer, and Kara Annenson, Director of Legislative Affairs. Thanks for the opportunity to respond to the Department of Legislative Services fiscal year 2025 budget analysis. DJS would like to thank Ms. Miller for her thorough analysis. We always learn something new from it, and it's also just very interesting to see things through someone else's eyes. The analysis requests that DJS respond to 5 issues and 2 recommended actions. Before I get to the responses and recommended actions, I'd like to highlight some of the work the agency's been doing over the past year. We continue to implement reforms and initiatives aimed at improving public safety through direct community engagement. Over the past year, DJS partnered with local communities to ensure that young people returning home and those served in the community were supported through strong community connections. DJS initiated new community-based and facility programming to better meet the needs of youth in our care while holding them accountable, all to improve public safety. DJS is committed to improving outcomes for the youth we serve, not just by reducing their recidivism rates, but also by achieving outcomes related to educational attainment, workforce development, civic engagement, and other positive youth development opportunities. The Thrive Academy, as you heard about, is the first program in the country where a juvenile justice agency is applying a group violence reduction strategy specifically focused on youth in the juvenile justice system. The Thrive Academy started in Baltimore City and Baltimore County in September 23 and expanded to Prince George's and Anne Arundel counties in January of 24. Those 4 jurisdictions tragically represent 85% of the gun violence against young people last year. Each Thrive Youth is paired with a specialized DJS case manager and a life coach from a nonprofit employing people with lived experiences in the juvenile justice system. The life coaches are people who have often walked in the same shoes as the young people, who meet with them and their parents or guardians to very clearly explain the ramifications of gun violence. You could come to harm, you could harm somebody else, you could go to prison. This is not just an empty lecture, because the life coaches then help develop a life plan that helps the kid move away from gun violence and towards success. Once that plan is developed and agreed upon, the life coach is in contact with the young person and their family frequently to provide support and assure they're staying on the right path. Thrive Academy youth are also provided with what we call a suitcase for success that's individualized for each youth's needs and may include stipended employment and apprenticeships with local employers or paid service opportunities along with workplace support and coaching, assistance with attending college or vocational training, confidential relocation assistance for young people and their families. Many of them are sometimes in danger of gun violence themselves. Trauma therapy, generally they've seen some pretty awful stuff by the time they're at the level where they're eligible for something like the Thrive Academy. Opportunities for pro-social activities such as camping, museum tours, public speaking, and junior life coaching jobs for young people who become part of the Thrive Academy Alumni Association, and fiscal incentives for participation and achieving agreed upon milestones. DJS is focused on rebuilding a continuum of services to meet the needs of justice-involved youth, families in our communities. During the prior administration, in response to a significant reduction in the population of young people arrested, detained, and committed to out-of-home placements, DJS closed 5 state-operated secure facilities and reduced spending on contracted out-of-home placements. Unfortunately, instead of using the cost savings, or at least part of them, to invest and increase the availability of funding for services, supports, and opportunities in the community, the prior administration returned more than $100 million in savings to the general fund over the last decade. To dig out of that hole, DJS implemented a 2-pronged approach to enhance services and meet the diverse need of our youth and communities. First, in the short term, the department's quickly identifying gaps in the service continuum and mechanisms to fill those gaps. As an example, DJS expanded partnerships with the Boys and Girls Clubs to serve youth at the front end of the system. Additionally, DJS is working with state and local partners at the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, local management boards, and workforce development boards to align grant and program opportunities that fill service gaps. The second prong of the approach is a community investment initiative. DJS, in partnership with the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services and the Department of Human Services, is working to identify the neighborhoods in Maryland with the highest needs and concentrations of our shared clients and work together with the community to provide youth and family services in an innovative and collaborative way. The collaborative CII initiative will ensure the department no longer serves youth in isolation, but rather works to help youth, families, and their communities to be healthier and safer. DJS improved its residential treatment programs by launching a new treatment program in July 23. The treatment program uses evidence-based treatment, a form of cognitive behavioral therapy shown to reduce recidivism as its foundational framework. This is literally trying to train young men, mostly men, to stop and think before they do something stupid. And there's good evidence that you can actually train young men in techniques that help them not throw that first punch, not do that impulsive thing. At the same time, DJS partnered with Juvenile Services Education Program to reduce idle time by launching after-school programming. There were a lot of kids playing spades and playing Xbox when I walked through. After school was over, school was pretty engaging, but after school was pretty idle. And so now we have after-school programming like you'd have in a regular school. Restarted off-grounds activities and trips for eligible youth, launched an employment program with the Department of Natural Resources and Department of Environment to provide year-round jobs for youth. So most of our residential programs are in Western Maryland. We talked about planting trees just now. Some of the trees are being planted by our kids, the ones that have high school diplomas or GEDs, so that they can now go work. Significantly reduced staff vacancy rates in the facilities from 18% in January to 8% in December. And now I just looked, the February numbers were down to 7% vacancy for our frontline staff. Launched innovation teams to implement cutting-edge reforms in DJS facilities and enhance services, supports, and interventions. So now I'm going to respond to some of the issues that were raised. First one is DJS should comment on how ARPA funds are being used by local governments to support the initiative. The statement of work for each of the 4 agreements that we funded through DJS ARPA is attached to our response. Medical expenditures, DJS should comment on whether a deficiency is required to meet the costs of medical care for youth in fiscal 24. We don't need a deficiency cost to meet the cost of medical care for youth in 24. DJS should comment on how it will procure services in fiscal 25, the expected youth participation in fiscal 25, the estimated cost of the program per participant in fiscal 24 and 25, and how the use of the Thrive Academy will be evaluated over time for efficacy and affordability. So all of that's about the Thrive Academy. So here's a response. DJS plans to procure services for the Thrive Academy by issuing an expression of interest to all programs that have a non-residential rate. A non-residential rate is issued by the Interagency Rate Committee. The IRC membership includes representatives from the Departments of Budget and Management, Health, Human Services, Juvenile Services, the Governor's Office of Children, and the Maryland State Department of Education. The IRC is charged with developing and operating a fair, equitable, and predictable rate process for residential childcare and child placement agency programs. DJS will work with the Maryland Department of Education, which is the lead agency, to support credible messenger programs receiving a rate through the IRC. So they'll get a rate and then we'll be able to procure with them. DJS has 3 current agreements for the Thrive Academy, which are estimated to serve a total of 150 youth over the course of fiscal 24. Using that figure, the estimated cost per youth is $10,000. For fiscal 25, the total funding is $4.35 million that we're requesting. This amount continues the existing fund for the 150 youth and adds an additional 150 youth across the state. That'll be about 20% of our caseload, or 1 out of every 5 kids. The estimated costs per youth based on a budget of $4.35 million, serving 300 youth, is $14,500 per youth. DJS is working with the University of Pennsylvania's Crime and Justice Policy Lab to conduct an evaluation of the Thrive Academy. That's the lab that did the evaluation of Mayor Scott's group violence reduction program. They're recognized as one of the leading researchers on this type of strategy in the country, and that evaluation will assist us in assessing the efficacy and affordability of the program. It's never been done with this population. We expect we'll make changes. So we'll be talking about that next year. Next one is about enhancing the services continuum. And the question is, DJS should provide a spending plan for this funding enhancement in fiscal 2025 and describe the services needed by youth in these populations. So DJS is going to direct funds to support the needs of 3 populations. First is youth diverted from prosecution, including children in need of supervision. DJS will expand services provided at the front end of the system to include interventions that provide family functioning, behavioral health, educational services, and specific interventions for youth under age 12 who possess a gun. The number of SINS complaints increased tenfold over the last fiscal year due to the statutory changes enacted in the Juvenile Justice Reform Act and the outreach we made to educate law enforcement, child serving agencies, schools, parents, and community members about the SINS process, because any of them can refer a kid for a SINS case. 2, youth diverted from pre-adjudication detention. During the analysis for the Thrive program, DJS identified many youth who did not meet Thrive criteria who reoffended during the initial pretrial release period. Often youth who reoffended were placed on electronic monitoring in the community for long periods of time without service or programming intervention. They just got the monitor. To better support youth in the community, DJS is going to contract with local service providers to help youth and families to navigate the services continuum and connect them to appropriate programming and support. 3, youth on community supervision or aftercare. There's a percentage of youth that are at moderate risk for gun violence but don't meet the Thrive Academy criteria. So that would be, let's say, the next 20%. Imagine 20% get Thrive. It's the next most risky 20%. DJS intends to expand supports and opportunities designed to prevent gun violence and meet the needs of moderate risk youth in partnership with local communities. By working with the local communities, DJS will enhance the current services to create a robust continuum of post-adjudication services in each county. Next question is about the Community Investment Initiative. DJS should comment on how it will work with DPSCS and DHS to launch the opportunity networks, how the site locations will be chosen, and how it will procure services. Here's the response. The Departments of Public Safety and Correctional Services and Human Services and Juvenile Services have each identified a staff member to lead the work of CII. The agency leads have created an interagency work group and focused their work by identifying a population to serve. The target population includes young people ages 13 to 25 and their families who have contact with at least 2 of those 3 agencies. Additionally, the work group will identify potential CII sites by mapping the zip codes of each agency's target population and layered additional data points like public benefit utilization and poverty rates. CIA plans on procuring services by identifying a backbone organization that can grant funds and support grassroots organizations and small to medium-sized nonprofits. Many of those groups are doing good work in communities. They just don't know how to get or can't really, they don't have grant writers that can answer a government RFP. Often programs that reflect the communities they serve are unable to obtain state funds. A backbone organization will operate to support programs by providing technical assistance, back office support, and creating a robust data tracking system. So now I'm going to move to the recommendations. Oh, we agree. However, we request you not withhold our funds. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I knew this was going to happen, but I'm going to take the first stab just because I think I heard you say something and I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did I hear you say that a good amount of the kids, and it looks in the analysis like 70, a little over under 70% are on community detention with electronic monitoring? Did I hear you say that those kids are not currently receiving additional services?
It was some are, but by and large, the when I started, the staff were saying, "Oh yeah, they're on a program." What program are they on? Oh, they're on electronic monitoring. It's like, well, that's not really a program. It's just a monitor, right? So our staff do visit them.
Okay.
And they do have relationships with there's the electronic monitoring staff,
right?
But we really need to attach them to more programs. Now, typically, they're not ordered into programs because they're innocent until proven guilty, like anybody else is, just like most adults when they are released, on their own recognizance, they're typically not ordered into programs. But most of them, if we work with their families, their mothers want them in something. So we need to do a better job of doing that, and we also need to resource that.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that kind of reflects back on Exhibit 10, the chart Senator Rosepap drew our attention to. Taking the two together, I'm actually not surprised by this number. So I think that's absolutely something this subcommittee would appreciate your focus on. And I guess I'm a little surprised. I didn't pick up on this last year. So we're talking about a little over 2,100 employees at DJS.
Kids, yeah.
And roughly 10,000 clients last year.
Yeah, although on any day, we have about 1,800. So
Okay.
we have more people than clients, if that's what you're getting at.
Okay. More people,
More
more
kids.
staff than that was.
More
what-
staff than kids.
That was what I'm getting at. So
Yep.
I guess that's why I was doubly, triply surprised by not having all the services. These are crying out for help kids.
Yep.
That's what they're doing more than anything else. Okay, Senator Jackson, Rosepap, then Selling.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is exactly the point I was going to make, and I think we want to partner with you to make sure that those youth are attended to because they are under your purview, and you are the closest unit within our system that they're engaged with right now. So if you could put together some sort of plan or, kind of let us know what kind of steps you're going to take to make sure that we are in touch with those who are awaiting adjudication.
By the time we come back here first of all, way before
It's
when
gonna
we
be
come back
before
here
that.
next
We're
year,
gonna be talking
we're gonna
that.
do that. But
Yeah.
by the time we come back, you will hear a whole plan.
No, I got you. I just want to make sure we got that. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to intervene again. Can we get that plan sooner than this time next year?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would your best estimate to putting a draft together that we can then work with the House subcommittee and presiding officers and
July 1st.
July 1st sounds like a great plan. Madeline's written it down, so it will be so.
It will happen.
All right.
Thank you. So back to the other chart. On
Which chart
page,
now?
on page 15, exhibit 10, the one that I didn't understand.
Yeah, sure.
And he sorted it out for me. So given what the chair just asked you and you responded, So the way to think about this is, again, 2020 ballpark numbers. 60% of 10,000 kids.
I'm saying it's more like 12,000, but.
Okay, but 60, but it's
Yeah.
it's that number. It's the annual number. It's a 12,000 kids. So 60% of 12,000 kids.
Mhm.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that. That was one. Secondly, did I understand you correctly that you have enormous numbers of kids with monitors at any point in time? 70%? Is that I missed that number?
70% of the kids out on pre-trial release.
But out of 10,000 in the course of a year, how many are on monitors?
Those are, we can get you those numbers, but those are young people that the court has requested to be detained and then have been on an alternative to detention. So we can get you those numbers.
Okay, get the numbers, but
Yep.
ballpark, is it most, a few? I have no idea.
Definitely not most.
Most what?
Not most of the population.
If
pending
you got a pool of
adjudication.
10,000 kids who come in the door, how many go out the door with a monitor?
I
That's
don't
what
know
I'm
the
thinking.
exact answer to that. So I
we'll
will
get
give
you
you
Because
that
the point
answer.
you were making about,
But it's most of the kids who are out on pre-trial release.
okay,
So
but
remember, we got a whole bunch of kids that are adjudicated, they're on probation, they're in a facility, they're on aftercare.
I understand.
None of that counts. But most of the kids that the judges don't detain are on an electronic monitor, 70%. And I don't know.
Okay, but the numbers would be interesting just to
Yeah.
get the sense of how
Okay,
many
yeah,
kids are on the monitors. That was the second factual question. Third, this is more a comment than a question, and it picks up on what the chair said and what you said. Is on the one hand, I mean, this is a huge recidivism rate. I mean, just huge. And that says two things to me. One is whatever we're doing isn't working. And number two, on the other hand, we know who the target audience is. We already know about them. I mean, the fact that they did it again, we knew the first time. And therefore, this should, I mean, conception, this is the whole strategy in juvenile services that you've spent your life working on. It just seems like it shouldn't be as hard as it seems to be. If you know who they are and you invest the resources understanding who they are and what's around them, it's not like you're having to deal with a million people. It's like you're having to deal with a very, so help me understand, not just here, but in general, why is it so hard once you know who they are to have them not do it again?
Right. So a couple things. First of all, rearrest and doing it again are not the same thing, right? So 59% of them got rearrested, 27% of them got reconvicted.
Right, but some people didn't get arrested and they did it again.
Right, absolutely. Some people who were not on our caseload got arrested, didn't get arrested and did things.
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so it's just not one and the same. And I think it's important. There is a whole legal system set up to figure out who did and didn't do it. And I don't want to skip over all of
Okay.
that. So I think it's
I
not
see.
unimportant. Two is like they come to us with a whole bundle full of problems collected up by a whole bundle full of
Right.
failures of adults to help them out. And we are part of that. I don't want to say
Yeah,
we're
I understand, I
not,
understand.
but look at some of the schools these kids go to. I mean, we've doubled the chronic absenteeism rate since pre-pandemic. If a kid's not going to school and they're not working, they're going to get in trouble. That's what kids do. And so, now we get them and we have to scramble, but very often they've had miserable experiences in school. They have no decent employment opportunities. It's what both of us talked about. I've talked about you and with you about this. Like, we have to get them to a point where they have the ability to get some credential and some work experience so they have a little self-confidence. And that is what we're working on and will be working on during the course of the year. 59% is lower than what it was in 2017 when it was 67%. So at least it's headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
But no, it's too high. It's absolutely
Okay,
too high.
thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to meet and talk about some important issues. I think one of the problems that I believe a lot of us have is that we talked about it more than once about the youth having monitors. But I think one of the problems is that they're having monitors and they're not entering a program, or they're having just a monitor and that's it, or there's a monitor and there's a program and there's more. And we don't know those priorities of what and where and how. And I think it's a major issue.
Yep.
I mean, the bad example is what happened to those that had monitors and what happened in Brooklyn. I mean, it was a terrible thing, and they had monitors, but they still broke the law. And then we're finding out some of those that have monitors and just have monitors, but have a list a mile long of other offenses. And we're still not doing, I believe, the right thing to make sure that we're maintaining a good and safe community with our families, our people, our neighbors. It's become a very big issue throughout Maryland. I know you've heard it more than once.
Yeah.
But I think we're not answering the call. And I think it's hard to just find a remedy. I understand that. But I think it still should be more conversations and more actions being applied to making sure repeat offenders, for instance.
Right.
It's a constant thing that's going on. I don't want a repeat offender. If there's ways we can make not just adjustments, but maybe changes of life. We've talked about applying good things to make sure that they have a great future.
Yep.
Bring training in some areas. You're saying you want to go out and you want to steal this car. Okay, we're going to make you a mechanic.
Right.
That makes sense. Let's do something and apply it in a good way. Change that whole field, change everything in the face of it. Make it a way where we're applying it, where they're achieving something. Because it's been destructive and very destructive in a lot of our communities. And our neighbors at times are afraid to walk out their door because we had a mother attacked in the middle of the street, 2 minors trying to steal a car. These things are happening. And it's sad, it breaks my heart. And they're our future. They're our young people. But their future is very dim when they continue this path and this pattern. This pattern needs to change drastically because it will continue on. And then when they're adults, what's their next action? So we need to change that now. And the only way we can change that is to change the face of it. Show them that they have a great future. Apply them to something that could make a difference in their mind. Give them a different mindset. And graft something in their heart and their mind that changes them. And if we could put something in there, it'd change your life. I believe all of us want that. I know you do. We all do. But we need to change that in a way to make a difference for our young people because I see disaster everywhere. I see the numbers. I see our police officers. They're frustrated. I see our courts. They're frustrated. And I think we are too. So I think working together, applying great things, making a difference for our young people, let's do that. Let's make a difference.
I could not agree with you more. And I have to say, it's been very interesting with the Thrive Academy because we're going from the county to county, talking to the police, talking to the county execs. And we're going to be talking to the folks that Senator Elfreth hooked us up with in Anne Arundel County. And we had a really good meeting with Chief Aziz in Prince George's County the other day, and about a dozen of his top level staff. And this was exactly the conversation we had. I think that a lot of times departments promise things to people and we really don't deliver on it. And there was really a sense that the Thrive Academy, because it's resourced well enough, because it's focusing on the heaviest kids, the suitcase for success, when we described it to them, there was excitement in the room. And we said, we created an algorithm to predict which kids would be in it. But we also know we're going to talk to the cops because they know stuff. They just forget the algorithm. They know which kid. Right. And we came out of the room with 17 names of kids. So I think that's the canary in the coal mine for us on really profound changing of the pathway that the kids are in. And I think too often we gave it a light brush. And I think we have to kind of take out a can of whoop ass, if you don't mind my language there. For some of them, it just has to change. And so, some of them won't accept that opportunity when we open the door. And that's why we have correctional facilities, right? That's what some of them are going to end up in. But shame on us if we don't open enough doors so that the ones that want to can walk through and give them like a real opportunity, not a fake opportunity. That's what we're starting with Thrive. And we're going to be doing more of that in the coming year. Part of that's why we're asking you for more money.
And Thrive, I look at it, and community investment initiative is important. I see that we want at least 10 over the next 3 fiscal years, which is great. I think we need to continue to invest in our communities. I think that's why we're here. Part of our this committee is public safety, and it's a major thing right now throughout every community that we want public safety for everybody. I'm not gonna leave anybody out.
That's right.
Our toddlers, our youth, our adults, our seniors. We all need to be safe in our communities. And the only way we're gonna do that is changing the face of it.
Yep.
And making sure that in some areas there needs to be accountability. And in some areas, we need to work with them and find that you went down this path. We want to know why you went down this path, and we have another path for you. And if we can change that,
That's right.
it would be a great thing for our young people, but for families, I think it's a big thing we need to do. Thank you.
That's right. I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Again, I almost want to kind of cut this exhibit 10 out and hang it on the wall, because I think, yes, the overall number of kids who interact with the system and arrests are one data point, but this speaks to just the way, you know, a few of us came from the education subcommittee, just the way we look at 6-year graduation rates as the marker of success or not. You know, we need to go in the reverse here. And this is our mark of success, whether we have successfully really rehabilitated a kid and given them the opportunity to not ever interact with the system again, let alone within 3 years. That's our job here. So I'm just going to really focus in on this. I'm looking forward to our meetings during the interim, again, bringing in the House subcommittee, bringing in Chair Clippinger, Chair Smith to have a comprehensive conversation about taking this chart, setting your goals to how to drive these numbers down aggressively over time, and then what you need to be successful in doing that. We kind of need to flip the script here of a child interacting with DJS shouldn't be a negative thing. It should be an opportunity for intervention to help get their lives straightened out for a lifetime. And we just need to stop. We need to start thinking about it. And this is the positive intervention space here, not a negative consequence for behavior.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to continue this conversation over session and during the interim, certainly, and the real work will get done. I do have a number of people signed up to testify. I'm sorry it's so late in the day on a Friday. I have 4 people signed up to testify. Kiasha Barber, Liz Park, Anisha Thomas, and Denise Henderson Johnson. And Mr. If you could stay and hear what folks have to say, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee members, Chair Alfred. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful opportunity. My name is Kiasha Barber, and I'm co-chair of the Maryland Association of Youth Service Bureaus. And we are here to support DJS's budget. And I couldn't agree more with our shared goal of improving outcomes for youth. Maryland's Youth Service Bureaus have provided effective youth delinquency diversion programs and treatment for over 40 years. And many of these programs have worked in tandem with the Department of Juvenile Services. I myself worked in the Prince George's County Office of Department of Juvenile Services as an evidence-based clinician working alongside the intake and probation units, seeing kids and families for more than 6 years from 2008 on up to 2015. I saw hundreds of youth come through and implemented evidence-based practice with them. Funding was abruptly cut short for those programs due to some changes in priority and funding. That was sad to see. Funding has been cut short from some of our other youth service bureaus who've also walked alongside the departments in their jurisdictions. I've worked for youth service bureaus in Prince George's County and in Southern Maryland, Charles, St. Mary's, and Calvert counties where I live. And I've seen Carroll County Youth Service Bureaus working with DJS. Baltimore City Youth Service Bureaus have had programs where they would work with families who had youth in detention over the weekend, and the families didn't want to come pick their children up. And my colleagues would come on the weekends, work alongside those families, and not just get them to take their kids home, but offer them evidence-based treatment in order to prevent further penetration into the system by these youth. I'll pass the baton to my colleague. Oh, yes, absolutely. We do have a bill that is, I wasn't going to talk about it here, but we do have a House Bill 1136 where we are requesting increased Youth Service Bureau funding. Today, we're here in support of the Department of Juvenile Services budget. And we know that there are programs that we can and hope to continue to provide to help improve outcomes for youth in Maryland.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I am the co-chair of the Maryland Association of Youth Service Bureaus, Liz Park. I'm also the director of Greenbelt Cares, Youth and Family Services in the city of Greenbelt. Youth Service Bureaus, as Kaisha noted, were established back in the 1970s. Then there were 22 bureaus across the state serving 10 jurisdictions. Today there are 7 in 3 jurisdictions. Up until about 2016, there were 19. Unfortunately, under the last administration, priorities shifted and those bureaus lost their funding, and those services that Kaisha was describing went away. Funding for youth service bureaus originated under the Department of Juvenile Services and then was shifted to the Children's Interagency Funds when local management boards were created. And when the shifts changed in priorities in the Governor's Office for Children, advocates such as Senator Doug Peters worked with us to earmark and designate funding for youth service bureaus. But as many of you may recall, then the previous governor refused to fund those initiatives. And again, children's services were lost and cut. We support juvenile services and work to look forward to working with them to serve the children of Maryland, and especially those kids you were hearing about who are pretrial. Those are the kids that used to come to the youth service bureaus. They used to walk them, as Kaisha described, the intake worker down the hall so that they could get engaged in our services. In Greenbelt, we work with our Greenbelt Police Department so that we can engage with those kids that they're encountering that you're describing, that the police know. And then we can come and meet with them. So we are just here today to support DJS's budget and want to work with them in supporting their efforts and in supporting your all's efforts to bring down that 60%. As in our testimony, youth service bureaus have a 95% success rate of keeping kids out of the juvenile justice system. Thank you. Yep.
Good afternoon. I'm sitting in for Anisha Thomas. My name is Andrea Harrison. I'm the Assistant Director of Programming at ROCA, Maryland. ROCA started 5 years ago, and we work with the highest risk young men, 16 to 24-year-olds in Baltimore City. We utilize cognitive behavioral theory. Our staff are not therapists or psychologists, but we're practitioners. So we teach them 7 skills to regulate their emotions, change their behavior. We are supporting the DJS bill. We work in partnership with them. We also have a ROCA Impact Institute, which assists in training other staff, the CBT concepts of the 7 skills. We've trained the Baltimore City Police Department, Department of Juvenile Justice staff, parole and probation, and the Impact Institute is all over the city doing that. For last year, we served 381 young men, and we had a 97% of those young men had no new incarcerations, and then 86% had no new arrests. So when people talk about, does it work? Does it work? Yes, it works. And what we see is the time, the 4 years is what is critical for our young people to get what they need, workforce readiness skills, as well as the CBT to help them get what they need. So ROCA is asking for an additional $1 million to expand outside of the city. A lot of organizations say, well, give these young men jobs. That's great, but they don't know how to work. So we specifically have in our transitional employment program staff to teach them how to work, showing up on time, regulate their emotions when it comes up with things, when their check is wrong, and so forth, and giving them that opportunity real time to be corrected versus getting out in the real world and you're going to lose your job because you're not able to make those choices.
Thank you all very much. Just any questions for, yes, we have one question.
She's not
Ms.
a
Barber,
question,
yes.
it's a comment. I think, hello, everybody. So I've had extensive conversations with you all over the years, even back in Prince George's about a decade or so ago. We looked at being the Senate sponsor of 1136 prior to. That bill got filed early, prior to sending the Office of Children back where it belonged.
Right.
And so those funds, we are actually looking, and we worked with Senator Peters in the past on ensuring, we're trying to ensure that funds were there as the funds were beginning to be depleted. And so it is something that we're looking forward to on this side. Since the agency is now back where it belongs, to look at what the budget is going to have in store to begin to put you guys on the right path. So looking forward to working with you all. And it wasn't a great move when the Office of Children got moved into GoCap. So it's sent the wrong message, send your youth to crime prevention, to the criminal committee or not committee, agency. So looking forward to working with you and glad to see you all here.
Excellent.
Thank you all for
So
spending the
much.
day with us. We appreciate your
one more.
patience. Yes. Yes. Thank you. And Ms. Henderson Johnson. Thank you.
I wrote this morning, so good afternoon. My name is Denise Henderson Johnson. I'm a 19-year veteran employee of DJS and president of AFSCME Local 3167. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I sit here brokenhearted and saddened at the state of our agency. We, as the employees of the agency, feel we have lost our purpose. I, as a 19-year veteran, can honestly say I ask myself every day, what is my purpose here? I don't feel in the current state of the agency, we are capable of completing our mission statement. I am not a PhD expert, but I am a boots on the ground expert. And I can paint you a true picture of what I see and what's being told to me daily in my role as president. We don't have support when it comes to keeping our workplace safe. Safety is never a topic on the agenda. But please explain how we are to implement any changes in law or policy that benefit the youth if we are concerned about our safety and the safety of the less aggressive youth that we serve. We need more staff, more operable equipment, and more support from management. There's no motivation for DJS employees with years of experience to stay and work for this agency. People are leaving in large amounts every day. How can you train the new excited employees coming into the agency if no one is left to support or train them? You can't. We already have one large facility with the longest working residential advisor has only 5 years of service. We need your help. When you say recidivism, you see charts and numbers. We see our youth graduating to the adult system or dead in the streets of Maryland. Programming, we need it now and fast. We need more pens so our agency can stop gutting support services to strengthen residential. Robbing Peter to pay Paul is not working. Instead of giving funds back, maybe invest in retaining your experienced staff. In short, we are here, we are dedicated, and we just need to be led in the right direction.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your service to our state. It did not go unnoticed. We appreciate you. Thank you. Okay. See no further hearing testimony. We are concluded for today, but stop. We are back on Monday in the same room, 1 p.m. to hear State Lottery and Gaming, Maryland Cannabis Administration, and MDEM. Everybody have a lovely weekend.